He slammed the divorce papers down on the table so hard the wine glass tipped over, red spreading across the white tablecloth like a wound, and every person in that restaurant turned to look. Damien Vossler didn't care. He never did. "Sign it," he said. Quiet, controlled. The voice he used right before something got destroyed. Elara didn't flinch. She sat across from him, hands folded, and looked at him the way you look at something you've already grieved. Not angry. Not afraid. Just done. "I'm not signing anything tonight, Damien. You don't have a choice." She stood up slowly, smoothed her dress, and said the 7 words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "I already made my choice. Months ago." She walked out. And Damien Vossler, the man who had never lost a single thing he wanted to keep, sat alone in that restaurant and didn't move for a very long time. This story already has your attention. You're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and follow this channel, because the stories we tell here don't let you go easy. Drop a like and leave a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what Damien finds next will change everything you thought you understood about this marriage. The night Damien Vossler came home from the Corvan warehouse, he was bleeding from 2 places and didn't know it. His driver, Petra, noticed when he got out of the car. She said nothing. She had worked for him long enough to understand that pointing out his wounds was not something you did, unless you wanted to be told to mind your business in a way that left no room for argument. She kept her hands on the wheel and watched him walk toward the front entrance of the estate, his jacket torn along one shoulder, his gait just slightly off, not enough for most people to notice, but she noticed. The estate was quiet. It was always quiet now. He went through the main hall without turning on the overhead lights, moving by memory through a house he had lived in for 11 years. Past the formal dining room nobody used, past the curved staircase, past the hallway where Elara used to keep a lamp burning on a side table because she said she hated coming home to a dark house. The lamp was gone. He hadn't moved it. It had simply disappeared the same way she had, without announcement, without a fight, without the kind of dramatic exit that at least would have given him something to argue against. She had just stopped being there. He poured himself 2 fingers of scotch in the kitchen and stood at the island, drinking it without tasting it, staring at the far wall. His shoulder was starting to ache. He rolled it experimentally and felt something pull in a way that told him he'd taken more impact than he thought during the fight at the warehouse. Corvain's men had gotten better lately. That was worth noting. That was worth dealing with. He finished the scotch and went to pour another, and that was when he remembered the office. He didn't know why he thought of it at that moment. He hadn't been in Elara's office since she left 3 months and 11 days ago. Not that he was counting. Not that the number had any particular significance to him. He had simply been aware of its passage, the way you're aware of a dull pain that never quite sharpens into something you can locate. Just there. Constant. Unaddressed. He took the bottle with him. The office was at the end of the east wing, small by the standards of the rest of the house, which had always struck him as a choice rather than an accident. Elara never needed the biggest room. She needed the right one. She had picked this one when they first moved in because of the window it faced the garden. And in the morning, when the light came in at that particular angle, it turned everything golden. She told him that once, early in their marriage, when he had come looking for her and found her sitting at her desk reading, lit up like something from a painting. He had stood in the doorway, watching her for almost a full minute, before she looked up and said mildly that he was letting the cold air in, and would he please either come in or close the door. He went in. He always went in when she asked him to. That was one of the things nobody would believe about Damien Vossler, that there was one person on earth who could redirect him with a sentence, and that he had let her. Willingly. Even gratefully in his way. The office was dark. He found the lamp on her desk by feel and turned it on. The room looked exactly as she'd left it. That shouldn't have surprised him. He'd told the staff not to touch anything in here, but it still landed wrong, walking into a space that looked like someone had just stepped out for a moment, when the truth was something much more permanent. Her desk was clear except for a small ceramic dish she used for paper clips. The bookshelves still held the novels she'd collected over the years, arranged not by author or title, but by some system only she understood. Two chairs by the window angled slightly toward each other, the way they'd been since the day she arranged them, as if they were still waiting for the conversation that would finally say what needed to be said. Damien pulled out the desk chair and sat down. He didn't know what he was doing here. He had come here with the bottle and without a plan, which was not how he operated, which told him something he wasn't ready to examine. He set the bottle on the desk and looked at the room, and he noticed the floor. He wouldn't have seen it if the lamp hadn't been at that angle. A hairline gap near the baseboard, along the edge of the room where the hardwood met the wall. He had noticed something like it once before, in a building he'd used for storage, a panel that had shifted slightly over time, creating exactly this kind of shadow. He'd learned to recognize it, because he had put things in floors himself when he needed them not to be found. He was on his knees before he'd made a decision to move. He pressed along the floorboard with his thumb until he felt it give, and then he worked his fingers under the edge, and the panel came up more easily than he expected. It had been accessed recently, or at least recently enough that the seal hadn't settled back in all the way. Space below was shallow, maybe 4 inches. Enough. There was a wooden box inside, dark-stained about the size of a shoebox, fitted with a small latch that had no lock on it. He lifted it out and held it for a moment, the weight of it strange in his hands. Not heavy, but not nothing either. He set it on the desk and opened it. On top was an envelope. His name on the front in Alara's handwriting, not her formal hand, the neat, careful script she used for things that mattered, but something faster, more urgent, as if she had been writing it under pressure, or in a hurry, or both. He set the envelope aside and looked at what was underneath. A diary. Small, cloth-covered, the kind you bought at a bookstore rather than ordered somewhere. Nothing special about it, except that it had been hidden beneath the floor of his house by the woman he had watched walk out of his life without ever explaining why. He opened it. The first page had a date, 10 months ago. He did the math without wanting to. 10 months ago, she had still been here. 10 months ago, they had still been sharing a house, sharing meals, occupying the same space in the particular way that people do when they are married, but no longer speaking about the things that matter. He remembered that period. It had felt like living in a house where all the furniture had been very subtly rearranged, nothing clearly wrong, everything slightly off. He began to read. I found out today. I'm still sitting with it, trying to decide if knowing is better or worse than not knowing. I don't have an answer yet. What I do know is that I can't tell him. Not because I don't trust him, I do. In the ways that count, in the deep ways I can't explain to anyone who hasn't spent 10 years watching a man be who he really is when the world isn't looking. I trust him to survive anything. I trust him to fight. What I don't trust is that he'll survive this the right way, without burning everything down, without making it worse. He read that paragraph 3 times. His shoulder was really hurting now. He ignored it. He turned the page. The second entry was 4 days later. Her handwriting was different, still hers, but tighter, more controlled, like she was keeping herself in check. Dr. Fern confirmed it this morning. 9 weeks. She asked if I was happy, and I said yes, because it's the right answer. And also because it's true, which makes the rest of this so much harder. I took the long way home from the clinic. I sat in the car for 40 minutes in a parking garage on Elm Street and just thought. I'm good at thinking in isolation. I've had to be. Damien set the diary down on the desk. He didn't slam it. He just set it down carefully and put both hands flat on the desk surface and breathed. She had been pregnant. He had not known she was pregnant. He sat with that for a moment that stretched out longer than any moment had a right to. Then he picked the diary back up because he needed to know. He had always needed to know. It was the one appetite he'd never been able to starve. Third entry, 3 days later, someone in his organization knows I've been looking. I don't know who yet. But I found the car outside the clinic, same plates, 2 days in a row, different drivers. That's not a coincidence. That's a message. The question is whether it's directed at me specifically, or whether I've just accidentally walked into something that's been running for a long time without anyone noticing. Damien's hand tightened on the page. The fourth entry, I tried to tell Marcus today without telling him what I actually knew. I was testing him, watching his reaction. He was too smooth, too careful. Marcus is always careful, but this was a different kind of careful, the kind where someone is making sure they don't reveal something specific. I've been watching people protect their secrets for 11 years. I know what it looks like. I know what it doesn't. Marcus Fenn, his second 15 years together. The man who had been sitting across from him at the Corvain briefing 3 hours ago, tracking Damien's reactions to every piece of information with his particular brand of attentive calm. Scotch bottle was right there. He didn't touch it. He read. The fifth entry, he came home late again. I waited up, not because I was worried. I learned a long time ago that worry is a kind of prayer for things you can't control, and I've never been much good at things I can't control, but because I wanted to watch his face when he didn't know I was watching. There's a version of Damien Vossler that only exists when he thinks nobody is looking. Tired, a little lost. Still so certain that certainty is the only thing holding everything together. I love that man. That's the problem. If I didn't, this would be simpler. He had to stop reading. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the garden in the dark. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. He looked like a man who had been hit by something that left no visible mark. He went back to the desk. The sixth entry was short. The name I was given tonight is Prescott. Not a first name, a last name. That's all I have. It might be nothing. I need it to be nothing, Prescott. He turned the name over in his mind and found nothing attached to it. Nobody in his organization by that name. Nobody he did business with. Nobody in Corvan's network that he knew of. He filed it and kept reading. Seventh entry. Marcus called me this afternoon, asking if Damien seemed different lately. More distracted, less focused. Framed it as concern. That's how Marcus operates. He's always framing things. I told him Damien seemed fine, and watched the pause on the other end of the line where he was deciding whether to push further. He decided not to. That tells me something about how careful he's being, which tells me something about how high the stakes actually are for him. The eighth entry, a week later, I found the secondary account. I don't know how long it's been running. Months at least. Maybe longer. The money isn't the point. He has enough money that what's being moved wouldn't register as significant. The point is the direction of it, where it's going, which is toward a set of shell companies I recognize, because Damien showed me that structure once, years ago, explaining how the organization protects its assets. Someone has built a mirror of that structure, someone who knows the original from the inside. Damien set the diary down again. This time he left it and reached for the scotch. He poured a glass and drank half of it. Then he made himself put it down and pick the diary back up. He needed to do this right. He needed to get to the end before he made a single move. The ninth entry, I've been thinking about what happens if I'm wrong. What happens if I've built this entire picture out of nothing, out of paranoia, out of the particular kind of anxious pattern making that comes from spending too long in a world where nothing is ever quite what it appears to be? What if Marcus is just Marcus? What if Prescott is a coincidence? What if the secondary account is something Damien set up himself and never mentioned to me for reasons that have nothing to do with betrayal? And then I think about the clinic, the car outside, the same plates 2 days in a row. I'm not wrong. He read faster now. The 10th entry 2 days later, I found Prescott. Not the person. I don't know who the person is yet, but I found what the name connects to. There's a protection arrangement that's been running parallel to Damien's main operation, a side structure that was designed to look like part of the empire but isn't. It's a tap. Someone built a tap into everything Damien built, and they've been drawing from it money, intelligence, leverage for long enough that it's become load-bearing. If it gets pulled out wrong, the whole thing comes down. Which means whoever built it has been banking on the fact that Damien will never find it, because finding it means destroying himself, along with the person who built it. Smart. That's a very specific kind of smart. Marcus has a partner. That's what this is. Marcus and someone outside the organization. Someone with the access to establish that kind of structure without leaving obvious tracks. Damien read the name that appeared in the next paragraph and went very still. He read it again. Then he set the diary face down on the desk and pressed his hands flat and stared at the far wall for 30 seconds without moving. Gregor Vane. Gregor Vane, who had been moving money for Damien's organization for 9 years. Gregor Vane, who had built the financial architecture that allowed the empire to function invisibly. Gregor Vane, who sat on Damien's outer council and said very little at meetings and was generally regarded as the most boring person in any room he occupied, which was, Damien now understood with a cold clarity that felt like being plunged into ice water. Exactly the point. Pick the diary back up. The 11th entry, I'm scared. Not for me, I was never that good at being scared for myself, which Damien always said was one of my most aggravating qualities, the way I couldn't seem to properly prioritize my own safety. But I'm scared for the baby. I'm scared for what happens when this unravels, and it will unravel. It always does, and who ends up in the path of it. A child is leverage. Damien knows that. His enemies know it. Marcus certainly knows it. The moment this pregnancy becomes known to the wrong people, the calculation changes. The baby stops being a private thing and becomes a tool. I won't let that happen. The 12th entry, dated 3 weeks before she left. I've been thinking about disappearing. Not forever, I don't want forever. I want to come back. I want to tell him everything and sit across from him in this house and watch him understand what I've been carrying. I want that more than I can say. But wanting something and it being safe are two different things. And I've been living inside that distinction for long enough, now that I'm starting to understand what it costs. If I disappear and he finds out why, he'll come after Marcus and Gregor in a way that gets people killed, including possibly himself. He'll make it about loyalty and betrayal, and he'll burn everything in front of him without stopping to account for what comes after. Done it before. I've seen what that version of him looks like. I love him, and I'm not sure that version of him survives this. If I disappear and he doesn't know why, if I let him think I left for the reasons he already suspects, that I finally ran out of patience with his world, then maybe he stays cold. Maybe the coldness protects him long enough for someone else to notice the rot. Maybe I can find a way to surface the information without it coming back to me, without putting the baby in the direct line of whatever explosion follows. Or maybe I'm wrong about all of this and I'm making a terrible mistake. I don't know. I keep not knowing. I've never been good at not knowing. Damien's had to stop and breathe again. He was reading his wife's private thoughts written in the dark, alone, while she was pregnant and frightened and trying to protect him in the only way she could figure out how. He was reading the interior of a woman he thought he had known completely, and finding instead that she had been more than he understood, braver and more strategic and more quietly desperate than anything she had ever shown him, and that he had been so consumed by maintaining his grip on everything around him that he hadn't noticed any of it. He had failed her so specifically, not dramatically, not in one obvious moment. He had failed her in the slow accumulation of being unavailable to the truth she was living inside. The 13th entry. He's different lately. I can't tell if it's the Corvain pressure or something else. He comes home and he's already far away. When I try to reach him, not obviously, just in the small ways I've always been able to reach him, there's something blocked. I've been wondering if Marcus has already moved to the next phase, whatever the next phase is. I've been wondering how long I have before the structure shifts in a way that makes it too late for any of this to matter. I made a decision today. I'm going to leave a record. Not for any particular person, not addressed to anyone. Just in case. Just so that if something happens, the right information is in the right place. The most practical thing I can think of. And then I'm going to leave. Not tonight. But soon, the 14th entry, soon as now. I've made arrangements. I won't write where even here. Even in this box under this floor. I'm not comfortable with that. What I will say is that I'm not alone. There are people I trust more than this organization trusts most of its members, and they will help me keep our child safe while the rest of this figures itself out. I want to tell him. I want to so badly. I've been sitting in this chair for the last hour and a half, just thinking about what his face would look like if I walked into his office right now and said, "Your second in command and your financial architect have been systematically dismantling everything you built, and they're planning to use our child against you once they're ready to make their move," and I found out. And I've been sitting on it for months because I didn't know how to keep you safe, and my love for you has been making me make choices I never thought I'd have to make. But if I tell him the baby is in the room where things explode, and I won't put my child there. Not for anything. Not even for the truth. So I'm leaving. And I'm going to hope that this box, in this floor, in this room, the room he almost never comes into, the room that's mine is safe enough to hold this until the moment is right. Until someone finds it who needs to find it. He'll think I left because of the Renata situation. He'll think he finally exhausted my patience. Let him think that. Better he's angry than afraid. Better he's cold than desperate. Better he's anything than destroyed. Damien sat in Alara's chair, with her diary in his hands, for a long time before he reached for the envelope. He opened it slowly, which was not how he did most things. The note inside was 2 pages in her handwriting. The neat, careful kind this time, like she'd written it more than once. Damien, if you're reading this, then you went looking. You went looking in the one room I always told you was mine, in the one house I stopped believing I could stay in the one space where I kept the things I wasn't ready to say out loud. Either something brought you here for a reason, or you finally ran out of other places to put your grief. Either way, I'm glad. I need you to understand something before you read what follows, and I need you to actually understand it rather than just let it pass through the way. Information sometimes passes through you. When you're already moving toward the next thing, I did not leave you because I stopped loving you. I left you because I loved you and our child more than I loved the version of my life that was safe. Leaving was not surrender. Leaving was the only move I had left that didn't end with one of us destroyed. Marcus Fenne and Gregor Vane have been working against you for at least 18 months. The evidence of the secondary account structure is in the third compartment of my blue leather file case, which is in storage at a facility on Crandall Street. The address is the one I used to keep written inside the cover of the red cookbook in the kitchen, if you remember that. The access code is the same combination as the first safe I ever watched you open in the Chicago property, the one you showed me when you said you wanted me to know everything about your life. I kept that combination. I thought it might matter someday. There are other documents, financial records, correspondence, a recorded phone call between Marcus and someone I believe is a Corvan intermediary. All of it is in the file case. All of it is what I put together over 7 months while I was in your house, in your life, carrying your child, and trying to figure out how to protect the person I love from the people who are closest to him. I don't know what you're going to do with any of this. I know what I'm afraid you'll do. I know what the old version of you would do, and I know what it would cost. But I also know there's a version of you that nobody else gets to see. The one that I fell in love with, not because he was powerful or untouchable, but because underneath all of that, there was someone who was capable of caring about something more than control. I have spent 10 years believing in that version of you. I'm still believing in it right now, writing this, not knowing when or if you'll ever read it. The baby is safe. We are safe. That's all I can tell you right now. The next move is yours. E. Damien read the letter twice. Then he folded it along its original creases and put it back in the envelope, and put the envelope back in the box and sat for a moment in the silence of her office, in the lamplight, in the particular quality of stillness that comes right before something changes. His shoulder was on fire. He opened his phone and pulled up Marcus's contact. Read the name. Put the phone face down on the desk. Then he picked up the diary again and turned to the very last page she had written. The entry dated the night before she left. I'm terrified. I'm doing it anyway. I suppose that's what courage looks like from the inside, not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving despite it. I left his jacket on the back of the kitchen chair because he always forgets it when the weather changes. I left the lamp on in the hall because he'll come home late and I don't want him walking into a dark house. Small things. Stupid things. The only things I can do right now that feel like love. If he reads this, I'm sorry for the silence. I was never silent because I didn't have anything to say. I was silent because I had so much to say and no safe way to say it. Come find us when you've done the right thing. I'll be waiting. Damien sat in the lamplight for a long time. Outside, somewhere across the city, his wife was waiting. His child was sleeping in some place he didn't know yet, some place she had chosen because she trusted her judgment more than the world he had built. He had built an empire out of control and fear, and the absolute certainty that if he held everything tightly enough, nothing would slip through. He had held so tightly that he hadn't noticed the rot working its way through the structure from the inside. He had held so tightly that the person who saw it clearly had felt she had no choice but to disappear rather than hand him information he would destroy himself with. He had never once thought about what it cost her to love him. Picked up his phone. Not to call Marcus. Not yet. He pulled up a number he had kept in a separate phone, an old habit from years ago when he had learned to keep different kinds of contact separate from each other. A number he hadn't used in 14 months. A number that connected to a woman he had once trusted more than almost anyone alive, who had walked out of his professional life for reasons he had never fully accepted, who had rebuilt something quieter and more careful, and who he had occasionally thought about in the particular way. You think about mistakes you almost made. Irene Castillo, former federal investigator. Current, he wasn't entirely sure what current. Something that operated in the gray space where his world and her former world overlapped. She picked up on the third ring. Vossler, no surprise in her voice. As if she had been expecting this. I need to meet, he said. Pause. When? Tonight. Give me an address. He gave her the address of a location they had used twice before, years ago, in another version of both their lives. I'll be there in 40 minutes, she said. He hung up, sat for another moment in Alara's chair, put his hand flat on her desk, on the wood she had touched thousands of times in the years she lived here. I'm listening, he said to the empty room. I'm finally listening. Then he stood up, picked up his jacket, left the office with the lamp still on, the same way she always left it burning against the dark, pointing the way back. Irene Castillo was already at the table when Damien walked in. That was the first thing that told him she'd been expecting this call longer than 40 minutes. The location was a back room in a Vietnamese restaurant on Kellner Street that had been closed for regular business for 3 years. The owner, a quiet man named Tio, who owed Damien a debt that neither of them ever discussed out loud, kept the kitchen running for exactly these kinds of meetings. The room smelled like broth and cigarette smoke, and the particular staleness of a space that got used but never aired out. Irene had a cup of tea in front of her. She was wearing a gray jacket over a dark shirt, her hair pulled back the way she always wore it when she was working, and she was looking at him the way she always looked at him, like she was doing a calculation, and the numbers weren't quite coming out even. You look terrible, she said. I've had a night. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. His shoulder had stiffened during the drive, and he felt it in the set of his jaw, the way he couldn't quite keep the tension out of his face. You're bleeding through your jacket. I know. Do you want me to? No. He put the wooden box on the table between them, watched her eyes drop to it and come back up. I need you to look at some things and tell me if what I'm reading is what I think I'm reading. Irene set down her tea. What kind of things? Financial architecture, shell structures, a secondary account system built to mirror an existing one without being visible from inside the existing one. She was quiet for a moment. How long has it been running? At least 18 months. Probably longer. And the people who built it? Inside, he let that sit, deep inside. Irene picked up her cup, looked into it, set it down again without drinking. Damien, if what you're describing is accurate, it's accurate. You don't know that yet. I've read enough. He opened the box and pushed the diary across the table to her, opened to one of the middle entries. Not the most devastating one. Just enough. Read that page. She read it. He watched her face while she did the careful, controlled face of someone who had spent years in rooms where showing your reaction too early was the same as losing. He saw the moment she reached the part about Gregor Vane. Her jaw tightened by maybe 2 millimeters. To someone who hadn't spent years watching people try to control their faces, it would have been nothing. To Damien, it was a full sentence. Who wrote this? She asked. My wife. Irene set the diary down slowly, like it was something that required handling. Alara wrote this, yes. When did you find it? 2 hours ago, under the floor of her office. He paused. She hid it. She was protecting the information and protecting me from what I'd do with it if she handed it to me directly. Irene was looking at him with something he couldn't immediately name. Not pity, she wasn't the type. Something closer to recognition, the specific look of someone seeing a shape they had suspected, for a long time finally appear in full. She's not wrong, Irene said. About what you'd do with it. She's not wrong about what I would have done. He heard the tense in his own sentence and let it stay. I need to know if the account structure she describes is something you can trace. It's real, it'll have points of entry that left marks somewhere. Financial structures that size always do. I'm not in that world anymore, Damien. You know people who are. Knowing people and asking them to dig into a criminal organization's internal finances are not the same thing. I know that. He leaned forward slightly. I'm not asking you to do this as a favor. I'm asking you because you're the only person I can go to with this who isn't already inside the thing I'm trying to understand. Everyone else is compromised, or potentially compromised. You're outside it. Irene was quiet. The kitchen made sounds in the distance, water running, something being moved across a shelf. Marcus Fene, she said. Yes, he's been your second for 15 years. Yes. And Gregor Vane has been managing your money for 9. Yes. Irene pushed the diary back across the table. Tell me what you want me to do specifically. The file case. Alara says she collected records over 7 months' account documentation, correspondence, a recorded call. I need someone to verify the records are what she says they are. Not someone inside my organization. Not someone Marcus knows. Someone clean. And if the records verify, then I'll know what I'm dealing with before I move. And if they don't verify, if she was wrong about some of it? Damien didn't answer immediately. He thought about the lamp she left on in the hall, the jacket on the chair, the 14 months of diary entries written alone in a room she called hers in a house that had slowly stopped feeling like somewhere she could breathe. She wasn't wrong, he said, but I need to be sure before I do anything irreversible. Irene studied him. That's different from how you usually operate. Yes. What changed? He looked at her across the table. I've been operating wrong. For a long time. Someone paid for it who shouldn't have. Irene picked up her tea, finally drank some. Set it down. The file case on Crandall Street. I'll need the access information. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table. He'd written it in the car on the way here from Alara's letter. Access code, address, a description of the blue leather case. Irene looked at it, folded it, put it in her jacket pocket. This will take time, she said. Days, maybe, if you want it done properly. I know. And in the meantime, you're going to have to sit across from Marcus and Gregor and behave exactly the way you always behave. I know. Can you do that? Damien sat back, his shoulder pulled viciously. I've been doing it my whole life. Irene looked at him for one more moment. Then she stood, buttoned her jacket, picked up a cup, and walked it to the side counter in the way of someone who had grown up being taught to clean up after herself regardless of the setting. I'll call you when I have something, she said. Use the secondary line. I know how to reach you, Damien. She paused at the door. The baby. Is it? She says they're safe. He heard his own voice do something uncontrolled on the word safe. A slight roughening that he felt in his chest before he heard it. Irene nodded once. Didn't push it. Left. He sat alone in the back room and finished the rest of the night there, reading the diary from the beginning again. This time slower. Marcus called at 7 in the morning. Damien was on his third coffee, sitting at the kitchen island, the diary closed on the counter beside him. He had slept for maybe 90 minutes on the living room couch and woken up with the particular clarity of someone who had processed something enormous and during the short stretch of unconsciousness and come out the other side into a different relationship with reality. He looked at Marcus's name on the screen. Let it ring twice more than he normally would, then answered. You're up early, Marcus said. Couldn't sleep. The truth, not the reason. What do you need? Corvain's people reached out through the Feldman channel this morning. They want a sit-down. Neutral location. Small table, their pick of the intermediary. Damien processed that. Corvain reaching out directly through a legitimate channel the morning after sending 3 men to the warehouse was either a significant miscalculation on Corvain's part, or it was theater, a performance designed to make Damien look in one direction while something else happened in another. Tell them I'll consider it, he said. Nothing confirmed until I've looked at the Feldman channel's recent activity. I already ran that, Marcus said. Looks clean, run it again. Different analyst. A pause. Shorter than it should have been. Sure, I can do that. Everything all right? Fine. Damien turned his coffee cup in his hand, looking at the counter. What's Gregor's schedule today? Another pause. I'd have to check with his office. Why? I want the quarterly liquidity review moved up. This week instead of next. That's a tight turnaround. I know. Move it anyway, Damien. Marcus's voice shifted slightly, not much, barely. But Damien was listening now in a way he had never quite listened before. You sure everything's all right? I sound like someone who didn't sleep, Damien said. Move the review. I'll be in the office by noon. He hung up. He sat for a moment. Then he picked up the diary and put it in the inside pocket of his clean jacket, the one he'd gotten from his room before coming back downstairs. He wanted it close. He didn't examine that impulse. He left for the office 40 minutes early. The Vossler Group's main office occupied the top 2 floors of a building on Radnor Street that looked from the outside, like the kind of place that handled real estate investment and nothing else. The lobby had good art and better security, and a receptionist named Delia, who had worked there for 6 years and knew without having been told explicitly that certain names were never to be announced before being confirmed. Damien took the private elevator, went straight to the corner office, bypassing his assistant's desk, stood at the window and looked out at the city for a few minutes before he heard the door. Turned. It was Gregor Vane. Gregor was a thin man in his mid-50s with colorless hair, and the look of someone who had spent so long being overlooked that he had refined it into a kind of armor. He dressed expensively but not memorably. He moved quietly. He had a habit of arriving before he was expected, which Damien had always interpreted as diligence and was now reinterpreting as something else. Heard you wanted the liquidity review moved, Gregor said. He was carrying a leather portfolio, the same one he always carried. His voice was pleasant and neutral, the voice of a man who had never once in his life raised it. I can have the preliminary numbers ready by tomorrow morning, if that works. Today, Damien said. Gregor stopped walking toward the chair he usually took. Today's tight. The full audit trail from the secondary, he stopped. A half second. Less. But Damien saw it the word cut off, redirected, swallowed back. The full audit trail from the secondary portfolios will take some time to compile. Gregor finished. Smooth as anything. Voice unruffled. Face arranged in the expression of a man mildly inconvenienced by a scheduling change. Damien said nothing. He let the silence sit. Gregor shifted the portfolio to his other hand. End of business today is doable if I start now. Good. Damien moved to his desk and sat down. Include the Crandall Street accounts in the report. Gregor went still. It was different from the half-second pause. This was a full stop, the kind that happened when a word landed in exactly the wrong place and the body understood it before the mind finished the calculation. Which Crandall Street accounts? Gregor asked. His voice was still pleasant. His eyes were not. The ones associated with the Prescott structure, Damien said. He watched Gregor Vane's face do something that it had probably never been asked to do in 9 years of working for Damien Vossler. It betrayed him. Not dramatically. Not in any way that a camera would have caught. Just a tightening around the eyes, a fractional compression of the mouth, a rearrangement of the polite blankness into something that, for one unguarded moment, looked like a man looking at the ground and finding it gone. I'm not sure what structure you're referring to, Gregor said. Then it shouldn't take long to tell me it doesn't exist, Damien said. Include everything on Crandall Street in today's report. All of it. Nothing compiled separately. Nothing filed under alternative headings. Full picture. Gregor was quiet for exactly long enough to confirm that there was nothing Damien could call him on. Of course, he said. I'll have it ready. He left. Damien watched him go, watched the door close. Sat very still. He had just showed his hand. He knew that. He had done it deliberately. Because he needed Gregor moving, needed him rattled enough to reach out to Mark Tuckus, needed that conversation to happen today while Irene was working, and before anything could be cleaned up or moved. Panicked person made mistakes. Gregor Vane had gone 9 years without making mistakes, because nobody had ever looked directly at him and named something specific. Damien had just looked directly at him. He pulled out his phone and texted Irene one word, moving. Her response came back in under a minute. Understood. Faster now. Marcus came to his office at 2 in the afternoon. He came without an appointment, which meant he had a reason he didn't want on record. He walked in and closed the door and sat in the chair across from Damien's desk and crossed one leg over the other in the exact posture of a man who was in complete control of himself, and Damien thought, 15 years. 15 years I looked at this man and saw loyalty. Gregor called me, Marcus said. I figured he might. Marcus's eyes were steady. They had always been his best feature, calm, watchful, the kind of eyes that made people feel he was paying attention to them specifically when the truth was he was paying attention to everything simultaneously, and you were just one part of the calculation. He says you mentioned the Prescott structure. I asked him to include the Crandall Street accounts in the liquidity report. Where did you hear the name Prescott? Damien leaned back in his chair. He had been waiting for that question since Gregor left the office. Does it matter? It matters if someone inside the organization is passing information they shouldn't have access to. Is that the concern? It's one concern. Marcus uncrossed his leg, recrossed it the other direction. Small movement. Restless. Damien. I need you to be straight with me about where this is coming from. If there's a leak, I need to plug it. That's my job. Your job, Damien said, yes. You've been doing your job very thoroughly for 15 years. A beat. What does that mean? It means exactly what it sounds like. Damien stood up, walked to the window, kept his back to Marcus, which was also a choice. It said, I am not afraid of you at my back. I've been thinking about some of the decisions we've made over the last 2 years. Positioning against Corvan, the way we handled the Bellard acquisition, the choice to restructure the Eastern accounts when we did. Those were all sound decisions. They were. Most of them. He turned around. Some of them I'd have made differently if I'd had fuller information. Marcus was very still. What information do you feel you were missing? I'm still figuring that out. Damien moved back to his desk, sat down, looked at Marcus directly, the way he used to look at him years ago, when trust was something he hadn't yet started examining for cracks. You pulled the analysis on the Feldman channel? The shift was almost nothing. Working on it. You said you'd have it this morning. I said I'd have someone run it again. It takes time to do properly. Marcus held his gaze. Damien, you've been off since this morning. Something happened. If you tell me what it is, I can help. That landed in a specific way. Offer of help from the person who had been systematically working to make sure Damien needed it. I appreciate that, Damien said. Let me know when the Feldman analysis is ready. Marcus sat for one more moment. Then he stood, smoothed his jacket, and walked toward the door. The door he stopped, didn't turn around. You know I'd tell you if something was wrong. I know, Damien said. It was the most honest sentence he'd spoken all day. in the most dishonest way possible. He knew Marcus would tell him something was wrong, a version of wrong, a curated version, a wrong that pointed away from the right direction. He knew that the way he knew what Gregor's stopped breath in the office this morning had meant. He knew it the way he now knew that 15 years of reading Marcus Fenna as loyal had been 15 years of being read as manageable. The door closed. Damien sat for 30 seconds. Then he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a secondary phone, not the one he'd used to call Irene, a different one, older, registered to a name that didn't connect to him through any chain a careful person would follow. He dialed a number from memory. A man answered on the second ring. No name, no greeting. "I need a surveillance team," Damien said. "Tonight. 2 subjects. Clean operators. No connection to my regular staff. Hours? All of them." A pause while numbers were being calculated on the other end. 24 hours notice is standard. "I know. I'm giving you 12. Another pause. "Premium rate, understood. I'll have the subject details to you in 1 hour." He gave a number to send the confirmation to and hung up. Then he sat back. His shoulder had eased slightly. He'd found a bottle of anti-inflammatories in his desk drawer and taken 2 of them an hour ago, which had moved the pain from sharp to dull without making it go away, which felt like an accurate description of his entire day. He thought about Alara. Not strategically, not in the way he'd been thinking about her since finding the diary as a source of information, a thread in a larger pattern, a piece of the picture that needed to be placed correctly. He thought about her the way he hadn't let himself think about her in 3 months, the ordinary way, the way that was just her, the way she smelled in the morning before coffee, the particular sound of her laugh when something caught her genuinely off guard, the way she folded her arms when she was thinking hard about something and didn't want you to see how hard she was working. The way she had looked at him, sometimes in the early years of their marriage, with an expression he had never quite been able to name, not quite love, not quite worry, something that contained both and was larger than either. He had been so certain he knew her. He had been so certain he knew everything that mattered about the life he had built. He took the diary from his inside pocket and held it without opening it. "Come find us when you've done the right thing." He didn't know exactly where she was. He had resources he could use to find her, the kind of resources that could locate a careful woman in a large country, if you were willing to be patient and methodical. He had not used them. He was aware that choosing not to use them was itself a kind of decision, a kind of response to what she'd written, as if some part of him had understood before the rest caught up, that she needed him to do the work before he came to her. That showing up too early, before he understood the full shape of what he was dealing with, was not finding her, it was repeating the same pattern, arriving and expecting her to fill him in, expecting her to carry the weight of his understanding, the way she had always, quietly, carried it before, put the diary back, looked at his desk, picked up his regular phone. He called his head of security, a woman named Petra, who had driven for him for 7 years and transitioned 3 years ago into a role that was harder to describe, but essentially amounted to knowing where everything was and making sure nothing fell through the cracks that shouldn't. Petra Boss. The security footage from the east wing of the estate. Last 3 months. "I need it reviewed not by anyone on the regular rotation. External review only. Send it to the forensic firm we used for the Bellard situation. That's going to flag internally." "I know. Do it anyway." A pause while she processed that. Petra was good at processing things without requiring explanation. "Timeline? 48 hours. I'll make it happen. One more thing." He paused. "If Marcus or Gregor asks what the footage review is for, you don't know. Someone flagged an anomaly in the system, and you're running standard protocol." "Understood." Another pause. "You all right?" "I've been better." He almost left it there. "I've also been a lot worse. I'll call you later." He hung up. At 4:30, Irene called. "I'm at the storage facility," she said. Her voice was lower than usual, the specific register of someone in a space where sound carried. "The file case is here?" "Damien, the documentation is extensive." She was thorough. I mean very thorough. This is not someone who put together a rough picture. This is 7 months of systematic, meticulous evidence, gathering by someone who knew exactly what she was looking for and how to document it so it would be usable. Something moved through him that he didn't immediately identify as pride. Then he did identify it, and it sat in his chest like something that hurt and didn't hurt at the same time. "Is it enough?" he asked. "For a criminal case?" "Possibly. For your purposes?" She paused. "More than enough." The account structures she traced Damien. The amounts that have been moved are significant. Not catastrophic to your operation on their own, but the direction of the money over the last 18 months tells a very specific story. Prescott's structure has been used to fund at least 3 operations that your organization was on the wrong side of. Corvan pressure last year, some of that was manufactured. You were pushed into a corner by people who knew exactly where the corner was because they helped build it. Damien sat with that. Let it settle into the full weight of what it meant. He had spent a year responding to Corvain's aggression, as if it were organic, as if it were the natural escalation of a business rivalry, when it had been at least partially orchestrated. He had been managed by his own people, while he was busy being absolutely certain that his grip on things was secure. Corded call, he said. What's on it? Irene exhaled. Marcus. And someone I'm working on identifying, but based on the financial routing and some context clues in the conversation, I believe it's a Corvain attorney. They discuss the timeline for what they call the transition. The transition appears to mean the transfer of operational control of your primary assets to a holding structure that Marcus and Vane would control jointly. They have a target date. What date? 6 weeks from now. Damien looked out the window at the city below, the ordinary early evening movement of it. All those people going about things that had nothing to do with any of this. They were going to wait until the Corvan situation came to a head, he said. Not a question. He was understanding it as he said it. Let it escalate to the point where I'd be exposed enough that stepping in looked like rescue. That's my reading, Irene said. They needed you weakened without being destroyed. Dead Damien Vossler is worth nothing to anyone trying to inherit his empire. An isolated, undermined one who looks like he's losing. That's something you can negotiate around. He thought about the warehouse. Corvane's men, getting better lately. He thought about the decisions over the past year that had felt like his own, and now looked different from the outside. All those rooms where Marcus was there, offering analysis, shaping the available options so quietly and completely that Damien had never noticed the shape of the hand around the information. I need copies of everything, he said. Secure ones. Multiple locations. Already on it. I'm photographing the documents now, and the originals stay in the case. She paused. Damien, what are you going to do? I'm going to be very careful, he said, for a specific amount of time. And then I'm going to be something else. She didn't press him. She knew when he was done talking. I'll have the copies to you tonight. The secondary line? Yes. He paused. Irene, thank you. Another pause on her end, longer than usual. Your wife put herself at significant risk to collect this. She did it alone, while pregnant, while living in the same house as the people running the operation against you. Whatever you're thanking me for, it's a fraction of what she did, I know, he said. After he hung up, he sat for a long time in the quiet office. The city moved below. The light was changing, going golden the way it did at this hour, when the day was tilting toward evening. He thought about Alara, sitting in her office in the morning light, in the room she'd chosen for its particular quality of sun, writing in a diary she was already planning to hide. He thought about her going to that clinic alone, driving home through a city that was more dangerous for her she'd ever let him see, and sitting in a parking garage for 40 minutes just thinking. He thought about her calling Marcus to test him, and hearing the wrong kind of careful in the pause, and knowing and having to keep knowing, quietly, for months, with nobody to tell. He thought about the lamp she left, burning in the hall, on the night she finally left. He reached into his pocket and took out her letter, unfolded it. Read the last lines again. The next move is yours. He folded it back up, put it away. His phone lit up, not the regular phone, the secondary one. A message from the surveillance coordinator. Teams in place. Subjects under coverage as of 1800 hours. He checked the time. 6:04. He looked at the message for a moment. Then he looked at his office door, the solid, heavy door of the corner office that had been the center of his operational world for 8 years. The door that Marcus and Gregor had both walked through today and would walk through again tomorrow, as if nothing had changed, as if Damien was still the predictable fixed point around which they had been carefully arranging their own plans. He was going to let them keep thinking that. For exactly as long as it took Irene to complete the verification, for exactly as long as it took the surveillance team to document whatever panicked contact Marcus and Gregor were making right now, in the aftermath of a day that had clearly rattled both of them, for exactly as long as it took Damien to understand the complete shape of what had been built against him. And then he was going to dismantle it with a precision that left no room for misinterpretation, No room for anyone to claim confusion. No room for the people who had spent 18 months managing him to argue that they hadn't known exactly what they were doing. He stood up, put on his jacket, felt the diary against his chest. He was almost at the door when his phone rang, the regular one, the one his entire organization used to reach him. He looked at the screen. It was a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go. Then something instinct, the specific animal awareness that had kept him alive in rooms where most men wouldn't have walked out, made him answer. Silence on the other end. Then a voice, young, female, frightened in the particular way of someone who had prepared what they were going to say, and then forgotten it the moment the line connected. Is this, are you Damien Vossler? Who is this? A shaking breath. My name is Sasha Farron. I worked for Gregor Vane, in the accounting division. Another breath. He doesn't know I'm calling. Nobody knows. I need you to know that before I say anything else. Because if he finds out, he won't find out from me, Damien said. What do you need to tell me? The pause was so long he thought she might hang up. Then they moved the timeline. Whatever they were planning, I heard Gregor on the phone an hour ago. He said something changed, someone got close, and they can't wait 6 weeks anymore. Her voice dropped further. He said 2 weeks? He said they need to move in 2 weeks, or the whole thing falls apart. Damien stood very still in the middle of his office. He also said she stopped. Started again. He said they know where she is. The floor did not actually move beneath him. It only felt that way. He said they found her 3 days ago, Sasha Farron said, her voice barely above a whisper now. He said as long as they have her location, they have everything they need to make sure you cooperate when the time comes. Damien didn't move for 3 full seconds after Sasha Farron stopped talking. 3 seconds is a long time when your body is deciding between responses. He had trained himself out of most visible reactions. Years ago, the flinch, the catch of breath, the particular stillness that telegraphs impact to anyone watching. He had made himself unreadable because unreadable was safe, because a man who controls an empire cannot afford to let people see what lands. But there was nobody watching right now. And what Sasha Farron had just said landed like something structural failing, not a crack, not a warning, but the specific feeling of a load-bearing wall giving way. Say that again, he said. His voice was level, it cost him. They found her 3 days ago. Sasha was barely breathing between words now. I don't know how. I only heard pieces. Gregor doesn't know I was in the adjacent office when he took the call. Closed the door, but the wall in that part of the building it's thin. I heard him say they have a location. He said the asset is confirmed, and that when the time comes it can be used to stabilize the situation. Asset. The word went through him like something physical. Did he say where? Damien asked. No, just that it was confirmed, that they've had eyes on it for 3 days. A pause. I'm sorry. I know this is, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. Thought you should know. You did the right thing. He made his voice calm. Whatever it cost him to make it calm, he paid it. Sasha, I need you to do something very specific right now. Go home. Not tomorrow, right now. If anyone asks why you left early, tell them you're sick. Don't go back to that office tonight, and don't contact Gregor or anyone on his team for any reason. I still have access to the leave it firm. No room for argument. I will handle what needs to be handled, but I need you not in that building. Do you understand? A small sound that might have been agreement. Then, is she going to be okay? The person they found? Damien walked to his window, looked at the city. Yes, he said. Not because he was certain, because the alternative was not something he was prepared to say out loud. Sasha Farron hung up. He stood at the window for approximately 4 seconds. Then he called Irene. She picked up mid-first ring. I'm still at the... They have her location, he said. 3 days. Active surveillance. Silence on Irene's end. Silence of someone recalculating everything rapidly. How reliable is the source? Reliable enough that I'm not willing to wait and find out otherwise. He was already moving. Out of his office. Past his assistant's desk. Toward the elevator. I need everything you have on Alara's possible location. Anything she told you. Anything that connects to people she trusted outside my organization. Anyone she might have gone to. She didn't tell me anything. We haven't spoken in Damien. She and I weren't close after you and I stopped working together. Think broader. People she knew before me. Before the marriage. Anyone she mentioned to you in passing over the years that existed outside my circle. Irene went quiet. He could hear her thinking, the specific quality of silence that meant active processing. There was a woman, she said slowly. I met her once at an event maybe 8 years ago. Alara introduced her as a college friend. Something Mara. I don't remember a last name. That's something. He stepped into the elevator. What else? There was a property. I remember Alara mentioning it once. She said she owned something outright, separate from the marital assets. Something she'd bought before you two met and never folded into the shared accounts. I don't know where. She said it was small. She said it was somewhere she used to go to think. The elevator descended. Damien stared at the panel. I need to find that property. Real estate records under her maiden name, Whitmore. Run every county in a 300-mile radius if you have to. That's a lot of counties. Start with the one she talked about. Places she mentioned. Anything. Give me 2 hours. You have one. He stepped out of the elevator into the parking structure. Petra was already there. He'd texted her on the way down. She handed him his keys without comment, read his face once, and stepped aside. Call me the moment you have anything. He drove. Not toward the estate. Not toward any fixed point. He drove because he needed to be moving, because sitting still right now was not something his body would permit. He took the long roads, the ones that let him think, and he thought about what Sasha Farron had said and what it meant in terms of timeline. 2 weeks had just become something much shorter. If Marcus and Gregor knew they'd been rattled, and the conversation in the office today had rattled them, he was certain of that. Then they would accelerate. They wouldn't wait for the planned transition. They would move to secure the leverage first. And the leverage was Alara. And the leverage was the child she was carrying. He gripped the wheel. He thought about what kind of man uses a pregnant woman as leverage, and felt something in his chest go very cold and very quiet. The particular coldness that had preceded every decision in his life that he could not take back. He recognized it. He had learned to be careful with it. But careful had its own timeline. And that timeline had just been compressed by people who had spent 18 months banking on the fact that Damien Vossler would always be predictable. His phone rang. Irene, 38 minutes after he'd hung up. I found something, she said. Property records under Eleanor Whitmore, her full name. Small parcel about 200 miles northeast, rural county. She purchased it 12 years ago, before you were married. It's not a house, it's a converted barn structure on about 4 acres. There's a mailing address registered to a management company that, if you follow the chain, connects to a trust in her name. She set it up to be invisible, he said. Very. If you didn't know what you were looking for, it would take weeks to trace. A pause. Damien, if Gregor's people found this, they're better resourced than I expected. Or someone helped them. He was already pulling over, entering the address into his navigation. 2 hours and 20 minutes. I need to get there first. Can't go alone. I know. He thought for 3 seconds about who he could trust. The list was shorter than it had ever been, and shrinking. I'm going to call Petra and 2 of the security staff she vouches for personally. Nobody else knows. And when you get there, if Gregor's people are already on site, then I deal with that. He pulled back onto the road. Keep working the documentation. I need everything ready to move when this is over. Damien. Her voice changed, dropped into something more direct. If you go out there and it goes wrong, if something happens to you before any of this is on record, everything she did goes with it. All 7 months of her work. I know. So don't do anything that gets you killed before it matters. I'll do my best, he said, which was not the reassurance she was looking for, but was the most honest thing he had. He drove northeast. Petra made the drive in just under 2 hours with one stop to collect a man named Callow, who had worked security for Damien for 4 years, and who Petra had once described as the person she'd want. Beside her in a situation she couldn't fully anticipate. Damien didn't ask for more detail than that. He trusted Petra's assessment of people the way he trusted few things that had never been wrong in 7 years. They parked a half-mile from the property address and went the rest of the way on foot in the dark. Terrain was rough, field grass, and loose gravel, and a tree line that gave them cover for the final 300 meters. The barn structure sat in a shallow depression in the land, a single light burning in what appeared to be a lower window. 2 vehicles parked in the gravel area near the entrance. 2 vehicles he didn't recognize. Not Alara's. Petra was beside him, her voice at the level of almost nothing. Those aren't friendly. No, he agreed. Callow had already circled wide to assess the perimeter. He came back in 2 minutes, crouching beside them in the tall grass. 2 outside, 1 at the east corner, 1 near the vehicles. Both armed, neither paying particular attention. They don't think anyone knows they're here. They don't think anyone can get here this fast, Damien said. Their lights on inside, Callow said. At least 1 more person in there. Maybe 2. Damien looked at the barn. thought about Alara inside it, which was he made himself not think about it in the way that served no tactical purpose. He thought instead about angles and timing, and the specific layout of a converted barn structure, which typically meant an open lower level and a loft above, one or two entry points, sightlines that were easy to control if you knew them, and harder if you didn't. "We need to move before they know we're here," he said, quietly first, loud only if it has to be. Petra looked at him in the dark with the expression she occasionally used when she wanted to say something and had decided not to. He gave her 30 seconds to change her mind. "There's a woman in there," she said. "Pregnant. I know who's in there." Then we move smart, not just fast. Both, he said. They moved. What happened in the next 11 minutes was not clean or controlled or the kind of thing that had a shape Damien could have described afterward in linear sequence. He remembered pieces of it the way you remember things that happen when your body takes over from your conscious mind, sensory fragments, disconnected moments of acute clarity between stretch of pure reactive motion. He remembered the east guard going down hard and fast when Callow reached him. No sound. Professional. He remembered the second guard near the vehicles being slower than expected, turning at the wrong moment, the confrontation brief and violent, and ending with the man against the gravel, and Petra standing over him with a breathing she was controlling by sheer will. He remembered pulling open the barn door, and then he stopped, because the first thing he saw when he stepped inside was not Alara. It was Marcus Fene. Marcus was standing near the far wall of the lower level, jacket off, one hand in his trouser pocket, the other holding a phone. He looked at Damien with the expression of a man who had been expecting him for approximately 30 seconds and was deciding whether to perform surprise or skip it entirely. Skipped it. "You made good time," Marcus said. Damien stepped into the barn. Petra and Callow came in behind him. His eyes registered the interior, the space, a table with equipment he identified as monitoring gear, a staircase to the upper level, and a third man he didn't recognize standing near the monitoring equipment, who tensed when he saw them. "Where is she?" Damien said. "She's fine." Marcus didn't move. "She's upstairs. She doesn't know we're here. We haven't made contact. We were watching. That's all. That's all." "Damien, listen to me before you—" "You're in a building where my wife is sleeping," Damien said. The cold thing in his chest was very present now. "You came here before I knew where she was, which means you found her independently, on your own resources, and you came here, and you didn't tell me." Marcus held his gaze. "Because I knew you'd do exactly what you're doing right now. Drive 200 miles in the dark without a plan. Because someone told you she was at risk. Someone told me you were using her location as leverage." Marcus blinked, one controlled blink, the kind that contained a recalculation. "Who told you that?" "That's not the conversation we're having." Damien moved further into the room. The unknown man near the equipment shifted his weight, and Callow moved to cover him without being asked, which was exactly why Petra had recommended Callow. "Conversation we're having is you telling me how long you've known she was here, and then you explaining to me why you had people outside her location and didn't come to me with that information. Because the situation is more complicated than you understand," Marcus said. His voice had the particular quality it got when he was choosing each word in real time, steering carefully. "And because for the last 18 months, I've been trying to manage a set of circumstances that you were not positioned to handle in the way they needed to be handled." "Manage," Damien said. "Manage me. Manage the situation. Which includes you. Which has always included you because the way you respond to threats is to confront them directly and leave wreckage behind. And there are situations where wreckage destroys the thing you're trying to protect." Damien looked at Marcus for a long moment. "You built the Prescott structure." Something moved across Marcus's face. "Gregor built the structure. I facilitated certain don't." Damien's voice dropped. Not louder. Quieter. The kind of quiet that in a room full of people makes everyone stop talking. "Don't parse it. You knew about it. You directed it. You used it. 18 months of systematically redirecting money out of everything I built into a parallel structure that you and Gregor control. And then you manufactured pressure from Corvan to create the conditions for a transition that puts that control in play." He paused. "Did I miss anything?" Marcus was quiet. His jaw worked slightly once. "Tell me I missed something," Damien said. "Tell me there's a version of this where you weren't planning to use my wife and my child to hold me in place while you took everything I built." "It was never going to hurt them," Marcus said. "Leverage doesn't work if you damage the thing you're leveraging. She and the child were always going to be protected." That was the arrangement. That was always. The sentence stopped because Damien crossed the distance between them in four steps and had Marcus by the collar before the last word cleared his teeth. He didn't hit him. He stood with him close enough that Marcus had to tilt his head back slightly, and he felt the particular physical reality of 15 years of relationship compressed into this moment, all the meetings, all the decisions, all the rooms they'd been in together, and the things he had trusted this man with. The arrangement, Damien said. Marcus's breathing was controlled. He was afraid Damien could read it in the subtle tension around his eyes, in the set of his mouth, but he was also, infuriatingly, still calculating, still looking for the angle, still doing the thing he had apparently always done, which was read the situation for the optimal exit. You need me, Marcus said quietly. However angry you are right now, you need me to walk this back. If I disappear, if Gregor disappears, the structure collapses in a way that exposes everything. Your accounts, your assets, your entire operational history. I'm the only one who knows the architecture well enough to dismantle it without taking you down with it. Damien released him, stepped back. Marcus straightened his collar. Something loosened fractionally in his shoulders premature. What's on the second floor, Damien said. I told you. I know she's there. I'm asking who else. Marcus hesitated 1 second too long, her contact. The woman who's been helping her. Mara Sutton. Anyone else? No, Damien looked at him. Looked at the staircase. Then he looked back. You said the arrangement. What arrangement? With who? Marcus said nothing. Marcus soft, dangerously soft. You said that was the arrangement. Meaning someone else agreed to the terms. Gregor and you agreed that she wouldn't be hurt. Who else was part of that agreement? It's not relevant to who else. The silence lasted 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, Damien watched Marcus Fenn do something he had never in 15 years seen him do, look away. Not at the floor, not evasively, he looked at the wall to his left, as if looking for something there that wasn't going to be there. And in that gesture was something Damien recognized as shame, which was the most frightening thing that had happened since he walked through the door, because Marcus Fenn did not feel shame. Damien had been in enough rooms with him in enough situations to know that shame was not part of his operating system. Regret occasionally. Tactical retreat. Never shame. There was a third party, Marcus said. Someone outside the organization who was providing resources. The kind of resources you need to build something like the Prescott structure without it being traceable from the inside. Corvain attorney, Damien said. Irene identified the voice on the recorded call. Marcus looked at him sharply. What recorded call? Alara's diary wasn't the only thing in the file cassis on Crandall Street. He watched Marcus process that watched him go through the stages of understanding that the intelligence Alara had gathered was more complete than he'd known. That the 7 months she'd spent in their house quietly building a case had extended further than any of them had accounted for. Corvain attorney. Name Damien. Name Lena Farrow. Marcus said it like putting something down that was too heavy to carry anymore. She's been running the Corvan legal operation for 6 years. She's the one who structured the external architecture of the Prescott arrangement. She's also the one who found Alara's location. Damien went still. She found it. 3 days ago. Yes, and she told you. She told me she'd found it and that she was going to use it. And I told her. Marcus stopped. His voice had developed something rough in it. I told her that wasn't the agreement. That the woman and the child weren't to be touched. She told me I didn't get to decide that unilaterally anymore because the timeline had changed. Because I rattled Gregor this morning. Because you rattled Gregor this morning. He exhaled. And because something else happened. Something I only found out about an hour before you walked in here. He looked at Damien with the expression of a man delivering information he would rather be anywhere else to deliver. Lena Farrow has been running a parallel arrangement with Corvan proper. Not the transition plan, something else. A separate deal. She agreed to hand your full operational intelligence to Corvain's leadership in exchange for Corvain absorbing the Prescott assets, once the transition was complete. Gregor and I were going to get significantly less than what we negotiated. Damien processed that. She played you. She played everyone. Marcus's jaw tightened. Prescott structure doesn't benefit Gregor and me anymore. Benefits Corvan. If the transition goes forward on Lena Farrow's timeline, which is now 2 weeks, Corvan absorbs your organization. Gregor and I get paid out and sidelined. You get nothing. Your organization ceases to exist as an independent entity. The full shape of it was visible now. 18 months of architecture, built layer by layer, And the layer underneath everything was not Marcus's ambition or Gregor's quiet accumulation of leverage, it was Corvain. Using Marcus and Gregor as instruments the same way Marcus had been using everyone around him, with the same fundamental confidence that the people being managed would never see clearly enough to understand what was being built above them. And Alara, Damien said. What does Lena Farrow want with Alara? Marcus met his eyes. She's not a leverage point anymore. She's a liability. She has documentation that could expose the entire structure, the Prescott accounts, the Corvan arrangement, everything. Lena found out about the file case. Not what's in it, but that Alara had been collecting something. She doesn't know where the records are. She does know that as long as Alara exists, with access to what she knows. Problem to be solved, Damien said. Marcus said nothing. The cold thing in Damien's chest moved, changed quality. It stopped being the controlled cold of a man managing his response to information, and became something more primal, something older and less negotiable. He looked at Marcus for a long moment. Then he turned and went to the staircase. Damien. Marcus's voice behind him. If you go up there and she sees you without warning, she's going to... He was already on the stairs. The upper level was low-ceilinged and warm, a converted sleeping space with 2 cots, and a small table and a lamp that was running on what appeared to be a battery unit. Kind you used when you were somewhere without reliable power and didn't want to create a draw on the local grid that could be traced. Practical. She had thought of everything. Alara was awake. She was sitting on the near cot, her back against the wall, knees drawn up to one side to accommodate the pregnancy. She was wearing a dark sweater, and her hair was loose, and she was looking at him with the expression of someone who had heard footsteps on the stairs and had been preparing themselves for whatever came through the door. The woman beside her, Mara Sutton, he assumed, 30-something, sharp-eyed, currently on her feet in the instinctive posture of someone placing themselves between Alara and the entrance slacked by about half when she saw it was him. It's all right, Alara said to Mara. Mara sat back down, did not take her eyes off Damien. He stood at the top of the stairs. His chest was doing something he did not have a clean name for. He looked at her at the pregnancy that was visible now in a way it hadn't been when she left. At the particular quality of stillness she had always had in high-pressure moments, the stillness that used to frustrate him when he was younger. Because he couldn't tell if it meant she was calm or simply extraordinarily good at performing calm. Still couldn't tell. You found the box, she said. Yes. How long ago? Last night, he moved fully into the room, away from the staircase. Sat in the chair at the table because he needed something to do with the physical reality of being in the same space as her after 3 months and 11 days and everything he had read and understood in the hours since. Are you all right? We're fine. She put one hand on the side of her abdomen. Small gesture, reflexive. Have you been out there long? 20 minutes or so. He paused. There were men outside. Her face changed. Marcus's people. Marcus is downstairs. She took that in without visible reaction, which was either genuine equilibrium or the best performance he'd ever seen from her. And he had been watching her perform equilibrium for 10 years. How much do you know? Everything in the file case, approximately, and some things that weren't in it. He held her gaze. Lena Farrow, the Corvain arrangement, the restructured timeline. She closed her eyes, briefly, opened them. She found us. 3 days ago. She hasn't moved yet. He paused. I think she was waiting for the right moment. After the transition gives Corvain leverage enough that it doesn't matter what you have documented, because the documentation stops being something that threatens anyone who has the ability to respond to it. Corvane absorbs your operation, exposing the Prescott structure only exposes you, Alara said. Not a question. Working through it. You'd be the one holding the evidence of something criminal with no protection and no platform. And Corvain would have complete deniability, he threw Farrow. Yes. She looked at him. You can't let the transition go forward. I know. And you can't handle Lena Farrow the way you'd normally handle someone who's threatened your family. She said it plainly. No softening. Because the moment you move against her, without documentation in place, without a structure that protects the evidence, she burns everything and you burn with it. I know that too. So what are you going to do? He sat across from her in the low-ceilinged room above the barn where she had been hiding for 3 months with the information that could save him and the child that had changed everything about what saving him meant. And he thought about what he was going to do. I'm going to need help, he said. The kind I can't buy and can't intimidate. Kind that requires me to walk into a room and tell the truth about what I've been and what I've built and ask for terms that I don't get to dictate. She looked at him for a long moment. You mean federal? Yes, you'd be giving up most of it. Probably. He held her gaze. Not all of it can be collapsed without hurting people who weren't part of the decisions. The legitimate operations are real, but the core of what makes me dangerous, the infrastructure, that gives me the kind of reach, that also attracts people like Lena Farrow and makes your pregnancy a strategic asset instead of a private thing. Yes, that needs to go. Alara's face did something complex, not surprise. Something closer to a reckoning the look of someone who has been holding an argument with themselves for a long time and is now watching one side of it win. Irene Castillo, she said. She's already involved. She verified the file case documentation tonight. She has federal contacts, yes. This could take months. And in the meantime, Farrow knows where I am, and she has a timeline. You can't stay here, he said. Not tonight? Not any night until this is resolved. He paused. I'm not going to tell you where to go or who to go with. That's not I understand. That's not mine to direct. But I need you and our child somewhere that Farrow cannot reach, and I need it handled before morning. Alara looked at Mara. Something passed between them, the rapid, compressed communication of two people who had been living in close quarters under stress and had developed the shorthand of people who trust each other's instincts. There's another location, Mara said, directly to Damien, the first time she'd addressed him. Her voice was flat and appraising. Farrow doesn't have it. Nobody in your organization has it. It's completely separate. Then go there tonight, he said. He reached into his pocket and put his secondary phone on the table between them. This number reaches me. It's clean. No one in my organization has it, except Petra. Alara looked at the phone, then at him. You drove 200 miles tonight. Yes. Because someone told you Farrow had my location. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. That's the first time you've ever moved towards something, instead of against it. She said it without accusation. As an observation, careful and accurate. You've always led with force. Even your protectiveness was force. You'd put walls around the things you cared about rather than just... She stopped, looked at her hands. You came here to get me out, not to punish whoever threatened me. That's different. I know it's different. It's not enough to undo 3 months, she said. Or the months before those 3 months where I was right here, and you weren't. I know that too. She looked at him. The lamp between them put gold light across the side of her face, and he thought about what she had written in the diary, about morning light through the office window, about choosing the room for the quality of its sun, and he thought about how many things she had chosen quietly, and specifically for reasons he had never thought to ask about. Go do what you have to do, she said. Not for me. Do it because it's right and because it's the only way through. When it's done, when it's actually done, we'll have the conversation that comes after. She picked up the secondary phone and put it in the pocket of her sweater. Don't come looking before it's done, Damien. He stood. Looked at her one more time at the evidence of the months she had carried alone, at the stillness she wore like something essential to her structure. There's one more thing, he said. Something Marcus told me downstairs that changes the shape of what we're dealing with. She met his eyes. Farrow isn't waiting for the transition anymore, he said. She accelerated the timeline tonight. I don't know exactly when she moves, but the surveillance on this location has been active for 3 days, and she's going to act before I can build a case. He paused. Which means, what I'm about to do, I'm going to have to do without the time I needed. How much time do you have? He thought about Sasha Farron's voice on the phone. 2 weeks, already compressed. Gregor rattled this morning. Marcus downstairs, his own plan collapsed beneath him, and now knowing that Damien knew most of it. Lena Farrow, somewhere in the city, watching a timeline accelerate, while the person she needed to neutralize had just driven 200 miles and walked through a door she hadn't accounted for. Days, he said. Maybe less. Alara looked at him. Then she said the one thing he wasn't expecting, in the tone she used for things she had already fully decided. Then you'd better not waste any of them. He went back down the stairs. Marcus was still standing where he'd left him, which was itself a choice that Damien registered. He could have run, could have called someone, could have done a dozen things in the 7 minutes Damien had been upstairs, and he had done none of them. Lena Farrow, Damien said, you're going to help me get to her. Marcus looked at him. She'll know I turned. Yes. She has people in your organization. People I don't know about and you don't know about. People she placed before any of this started. Damien looked at him steadily. I know. Then you know that when we move against her, We're moving blind against an unknown number of people who are already inside. Marcus's voice was flat. Not frightened, something past frightened. Into the territory of a man who has fully assessed his options and found them uniformly bad. You know that the moment this starts, you don't know who's going to be standing on your side when it ends. I know, Damien said for the third time. Each time he said it, it meant something different. This time it meant, I am going in with my eyes open and I am going anyway, which is not how I have ever done this before, but it is what this requires. Marcus held his gaze for a long moment. Then he picked up his jacket from the table and put it on. Where do we start? He said. And outside the barn, in the dark field, the first pale edge of dawn was starting on the horizons, not enough to see by yet, just enough to know it was coming. They drove back in 2 cars, Damien alone in the lead vehicle, Marcus following with the man he'd brought whose name Damien still didn't know and didn't ask. Petra rode with Damien. Callow drove the second car. Nobody spoke much. The sky was doing that pale gray thing it did in the hour before real dawn. The sky that was not dark and not light, but something in between that made the road feel like the inside of something unfinished. Damien drove with both hands on the wheel and thought about Lena Farrow. He knew the name, but not the person. Corvain's legal operation was deliberately opaque, the way all legitimate-facing arms of criminal enterprises were designed to be, professional and credentialed and distant enough from the operational side that any direct connection required a level of documentation most investigators didn't have the patience to build. He had known for years that Corvain used a law firm as a buffer. He had not known who ran it. He had not thought he needed to know, which was precisely the kind of assumption Lena Farrow had been banking on. She's going to know Marcus is burned, he said to Petra. Petra glanced at him. How fast? Fast enough. She had eyes on that location. She'll have had coverage on Marcus, too, if she was being thorough. She knows he was there. She knows he didn't call it in and didn't act. He tapped 2 fingers on the wheel. She'll move when she realizes the surveillance team we took down hasn't checked in. When's their next check-in? He didn't know the answer to that, which meant they had somewhere between 20 minutes and 2 hours. And that range was too wide to plan inside. He called Marcus's phone through the car system. The surveillance team you had on the property, he said when Marcus picked up. What was their check-in protocol? Every 4 hours, Marcus said. Last check-in was at 0200. Damien checked the dashboard clock. 5:47. So she already knows, Petra said. She already knows, Damien confirmed. Which means she's either moving or she's waiting to see what I do next. He thought about it. She'll wait. She still has the transition timeline. She still has the Prescott structure and the Corvain arrangement. And Gregor, who she'll assume I don't have enough on to move against cleanly. She'll reassess and she'll give herself a window to set the board back up. How long a window? Hours, not days. He pulled out his phone. I need to reach Irene now. Irene answered on the first ring. She had clearly not slept. Tell me where you are. On the road. 2 hours out from the city. He kept his voice even. Situation has changed. Lena Farrow isn't a peripheral player, she's the primary. And she knows we found the property. A silence that lasted exactly as long as it took Irene to update her internal picture of the situation. How exposed is Alara? Moving to a secondary location tonight. Farrow doesn't have it. He paused. I need to know everything you can get me on Farrow. Not the law firm, the person. How she operates, who she uses, where she has access, that Corvain doesn't officially have access to. I need the shape of how she moves. That's going to take time I don't have, Irene said. Take what time you have and give me what you get. He kept his eyes on the road. And Irene, the federal contact. I need to know if it's a conversation that can happen in the next 12 hours. Another silence, longer Damien. A federal approach requires preparation. Can't walk into that. I'm not walking in unprepared. Alara's documentation is the preparation. The file case plus verification from you, plus the recorded call is enough to open a conversation. What I need to know is whether the conversation can happen today. I'll make a call. She didn't sound happy about it. Are you sure about this? No, he said. I'm doing it anyway. He hung up. Petra was watching the road, but her jaw was set in the particular way it got when she was processing something she didn't love. Federal, she said. Not a question, yes. That changes everything for a lot of people in the organization. I know. People who've been loyal, I know. Petra? He said it with the weight it deserved. The legitimate operations stay intact. The people who've been running clean. Nobody who works for you has been completely clean, Damien. I know that too. He held the wheel. I'm not pretending this is consequence-free. I'm saying the alternative is Corvan absorbs what I built, and Alara and the baby are leverage for whoever wants to use them, indefinitely, because that's what happens when you stay in the system you're in. I'm choosing the consequence that has an ending. Petra said nothing for a while. The road ran under them. The sky got marginally lighter. The people she has inside your organization, Petra said finally. Pharaoh's people. We don't know who they are. No. Which means when you walk back into the building today, I know. I can limit the access points, she said. If I start now, I can lock down the primary floors to a small roster before you arrive. Anyone not on the roster can't get in. Do it, he said. Start with anyone who is connected to the Corvan communications over the last 18 months. Cross-reference with anyone Marcus brought into the building in the last year without running through standard intake. Petra had her phone out before he finished the sentence. He drove. His shoulder had stiffened completely in the cold of the early morning, and his eyes felt like they'd been cleaned with something abrasive. He had been awake for somewhere near 24 hours, and the quality of his thinking was starting to show it at the edges, not in the core, not in the part that ran calculations and held strategic pictures, but in the peripheral reactions, the small things. He caught himself gripping the wheel harder than necessary and made himself loosen his hands. He thought about Alara in the barn, the way she'd looked at him. You came here to get me out, not to punish whoever threatened me. He had done that. And the fact that she noticed that she marked it as different from how he'd always been sat with him as a particular kind of evidence about his own history that he didn't have the bandwidth to fully examine right now, but that was going to require examining at some point when there was space for it. Thought about the baby. 7 months, give or take, based on when the diary started. He thought about what it meant to have a child in a world shaped by the decisions he'd made, and felt the thing in his chest that had been cold become something warmer and more uncomfortable, which was harder to manage. He focused on the road. They reached the city at 7:42. Damien went directly to the building on Radnor Street. Petra had been on her phone for the entire drive, and when they walked into the lobby, she had already reconfigured the access roster. 2 security staff at the elevator, faces Damien recognized from Petra's personal shortlist of people she'd stake something on. The receptionist wasn't at the desk yet. The upper floors were quiet. Gregor Vane was in the building. Petra told him that in the elevator, low and direct. Came in at 6:15. He's in his office. He's made 3 internal calls, and 1 external call that went to a number our system flagged, but couldn't identify. Pharaoh. Almost certainly. Anyone else in early? 2 people from Gregor's accounting team, both on the flagged list from your cross-reference. Petra paused. Marcus's regular staff aren't in yet. His assistant called to say he'd be late. Marcus won't be in at all today, Damien said. I need him somewhere else and working, not visible. The elevator opened on the executive floor. Empty corridor, clean light, the ordinary silence of an office before the day staffed up. Damien walked to his office and went in and sat at his desk and looked at the surface of it, the organized landscape of a man who had controlled everything, and thought about what the next 12 hours required. He opened the bottom desk drawer, pulled out a device the size and shape of a thick pen, a recorder, old model, reliable, no wireless component, no signal to intercept. Checked the battery, clipped it inside his jacket. Then he called Gregor Vane's extension. It rang twice. Yes. Gregor's voice was careful and precise, the voice of a man who had been sitting at his desk for 90 minutes rehearsing being normal. My office, Damien said. Now. He hung up. Gregor arrived in 4 minutes, which was 3 minutes faster than usual, which told Damien everything about the state of his nerves. He came in with the leather portfolio under his arm and the expression of a man who had decided on a posture and was holding it with some effort, calm, helpful, slightly puzzled. Exactly the expression of someone who had nothing to be concerned about and was concerned about why he'd been called in. Morning, Gregor said. Close the door, Damien said. Gregor closed it, sat in the chair across from the desk, placed the portfolio on his knee. The liquidity report is nearly ready. I worked through the night on. Where's Lena Farrow right now, Damien said. Portfolio slid off Gregor's knee, caught it before it hit the floor, which was a quick reaction for a man who was supposed to be composed. And the quickness itself was tell it was a body reacting to a shock before the mind could manage it. I don't know what Gregor. Damien's voice was quiet and absolute. We are past that. We were past it yesterday morning, when you stopped yourself mid-sentence in this office. We are significantly past it now. I was at the property 2 hours ago. I talked to Marcus. I know the shape of the arrangement. I know the Corvain connection. I know the structure Marcus built with you, and that Pharaoh has been running separately underneath both of you. He paused. I know she played you. I know you built something over 18 months, and then found out in the last few days that the thing you built doesn't benefit you. It benefits her and Corvain. And you and Marcus get a payout and a door. Gregor had gone very still. His hands on the portfolio were not shaking. He had better control than that. But the color in his face had changed in the specific way of someone whose circulatory system was responding to adrenaline, regardless of what they wanted their face to do. What do you want? Gregor said. Flat, direct, stripped of the pleasant neutrality he wore like a second skin. Where is Pharaoh? If I tell you that, she'll know I told you. She already knows I was at the property. She already knows Marcus is burned. Your position is not protected by silence right now, it's just silence. Damien held his gaze. Where is she? Gregor looked at his hands, then at Damien. She has a suite at the Arlen on Castwell. She's been there for the last 10 days. She operates out of there when she's in the city on Corvan business. He paused. She'll have people with her. At least 3, possibly more. She doesn't move through this city without coverage. Does she know your location right now? She knows I'm in the building. Gregor's jaw worked once. She texted me 40 minutes ago. She knows the surveillance team on the property went silent. She asked me to confirm your current status. What did you tell her? That I was working on it. He looked at Damien with something that was not quite remorse and not quite calculation, but was somewhere between both. She's going to move today. If she hasn't heard something reassuring from me by noon, she's going to move. What does moving mean for her? It means she activates the transition documentation. Prescott transfer goes live, the accounts move, the operational files go to Corvan. The structure collapses in a way that points back at you as the architect. He paused. And it means she sends people to wherever Alara is. She doesn't have the secondary location. She has resources I don't know the full extent of. Gregor's voice was flat. He wasn't trying to frighten Damien. He was doing what he did, which was being precise about numbers and resources, because precision was the only mode he genuinely operated in. I built the financial structure. I don't know what else she has in place. I only know what she told me, and she told me what she needed me to know. Did she tell you about the people she placed inside this organization? Gregor went very quiet. His hands tightened on the portfolio. Yes, Damien said. I know about those too. Who are they? I only know one name for certain. He said it like pulling a tooth. Your head of communications, Rena Doyle. She's been on Pharaoh's payroll since she joined your staff 14 months ago. Rena Doyle, who sat 3 doors down from Damien's office and had access to every external-facing communication, every press interface, every official statement, who had been in the building since Damien looked at the roster Petra had sent to his phone. Since 6:50 this morning, he texted Petra Rena Doyle, remove her access and keep her in the building. Now, he watched the text deliver and then looked back at Gregor. You're going to help me end this today. If I help you, Pharaoh destroys me. If you don't help me, I do. He said it without anger, which made it land harder than anger would have. You have one path that doesn't end with you, losing everything you spent 9 years building. It's not a good path, it's narrow, and it's got conditions attached that you're not going to love. But it's the only one that exists. Gregor looked at him across the desk. The morning light was coming through the windows now, actual daylight, and in it Gregor looked what he was. A tired man in his mid-50s who had made a calculation 18 months ago that had seemed sound and was now sitting in the wreckage of it. What conditions, he said, Damien told him. By 10:15, 3 things were in motion simultaneously. Irene was on a call with a federal contact named Sawyer, who had apparently been watching the Corvain organization's financial activity for 14 months from the outside, and who, according to Irene, specifically interested in the Prescott structure because it connected to 3 other investigations he'd been building. She was transmitting the photograph documentation from the file case in real time. Conversation, she texted Damien, was happening faster than she'd expected because the evidence was better than anything Sawyer's team had been able to build independently. Marcus, working from a location Damien had sent him to an hour ago, a property connected to a business entity that had no visible relationship to any of Damien's known operations, was preparing a full written account of the Prescott arrangements. Instruction, signed and witnessed, that named every decision point and every participant. His lawyer, his own lawyer, was present. That had been Damien's condition. Marcus cooperated fully and on record. And in exchange, Damien didn't move against Marcus independently before the federal conversation was complete. It was not a comfortable arrangement for either of them. It was the only one that worked. Gregor was in the conference room with Petra standing outside the door, compiling the financial records that would allow Sawyer's team to trace the Prescott money in both directions, its forcing and forward to where it was positioned to go once the transition triggered. And Rena Doyle was in a small room on the second floor that was used for storage and IT equipment. Sit in a chair that Petra had put there for the purpose. Looking at the wall, Damien went to see her at 10:30. She was in her mid-40s, Rena Doyle, with a particular kind of composed energy that worked well in communications roles, quick on her feet, good at reading rooms, good at managing the gap between what people wanted to say and what it was safe to say. She looked at Damien when he came in with the expression of someone who had been running possible scenarios in their head for the last 90 minutes and had decided on a strategy. "I want to speak to a lawyer," she said. "You can." He sat in the chair across from her. The room was small enough that there wasn't much space between them. "That's your right, and I'm not going to argue with it. But I want to say something first, and then you can decide." She looked at him, waiting. "Farrow placed you here to monitor and report," he said. "I don't know what she told you about why. I don't know what she offered you or what she threatened you with to get your cooperation. I'm not assuming it was simple or that you were enthusiastic about it." He paused. "What I know is that she's going to move today, and when she moves, she's going to burn everything behind her, including the people she used. That includes you." Rena said nothing. "She doesn't care about protecting her sources," he said. "Cares about completing the Corvan acquisition and being positioned on the right side of it when it's done. You are not going to be on the right side of it. You're going to be on the side that gets pointed to when someone needs to explain how the information got out, and Farrow is going to be somewhere with documentation that says the leak was yours and the initiative was someone else's." Still nothing. But her hands folded in her lap had tightened. "I have a federal conversation happening right now," Damien said. "It's going to result in something that covers a lot of people. People who cooperate before it closes get terms that the people who don't cooperate don't get." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not offering you immunity. I can't offer you that. But I can offer you the difference between being a person who provided information voluntarily and a person who was identified and extracted. That difference is significant, and it's time-sensitive." Rena Doyle unfolded her hands, folded them again, looked at the wall. "She has a contact inside the federal building," she said. "Someone in administration, I don't know who. I was never told the name. But she said that if anyone in your organization tried to go federal, she'd know about it within the hour." Damien absorbed that. "She told you that." "She told me that specifically. She said it was a fail-safe." Rena met his eyes. "She told me this 6 weeks ago, when she was briefing me on the transition timeline. She was very confident about it." He stood up. "Irene," he said, to no one in the room, but to the thought of Irene, who was right now on a call with Sawyer. He pulled out his phone and texted her 3 words. "Stop. Call me." His phone rang in 40 seconds. "What happened?" Irene said. "Farrow has a contact in the federal building. Administration level. She said she'd know within an hour if anyone approached federal with this." He kept his voice even. "Has Sawyer mentioned anything to his team? Anyone outside his direct office?" A pause on Irene's end. He heard her moving, the sound of her walking away from wherever she'd been. He mentioned to one other person, his administrative contact, who schedules his outside meetings. "Standard practice." She stopped. "Oh no." "Yes, his administrative scheduler. She has access to his calendar and his meeting records." Irene's voice had gone flat and focused. "If Farrow has someone in that position." "Farrow knows the conversation is happening," Damien said. "I mean, she's not waiting until noon. She's moving now." He was already out the door when his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. Stopped in the corridor and looked at it. The text was 3 words and a location she knows. "Arlen Hotel." He stared at it. "Who is this?" he typed back. The response came in seconds. "Sasha Farron. I work for Gregor. I told you about the timeline. Please hurry." He was at the elevator before he finished reading it. "Petra," he said into his phone. "Already moving," Petra said. She had apparently read the situation from his pace or his face, or some other signal she'd learned over 7 years to decode. "Callow's outside with the car. The Arlen on Castwell," he said. "And get me Sawyer's direct cell. Not through Irene directly. I need to talk to him before Farrow does. I don't have. Get it from Irene. Right now." He stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, and he stood in the small mirrored space and looked at his own face, which was the face of a man who had not slept and had been moving for 12 hours and was now running toward the thing he'd been circling all night, instead of away from it, which was different enough from his usual movement through crisis that it felt like using a muscle he hadn't used in years, not atrophied, just underused. A little rough, but there. The lobby. The car. Callow already had it moving before Damien's door was fully closed. Irene called. Sawyer's number. She read it out. He memorized it. Said she's Damien. Farrow's contact in the building has already flagged the meeting to her. Sawyer confirmed. Just now he got a call from Farrow's lawyer 20 minutes ago. A legal threat. Defamation framing. The kind that's designed to make federal contacts hesitate. She paused, trying to shut the conversation down before it goes on formal record. Can she? She can slow it. She can't stop it if the documentation is already in Sawyer's hands. Is it? Most of it. 60, maybe 70%. Another pause. The recorded call is the keystone. Damien. The call between Marcus and Farrow's intermediary. That's what Sawyer needs to tie the Corvain connection directly to the Prescott structure. Without it, he has financial fraud, but not the criminal conspiracy charge that gives him jurisdiction over Corvain's operation. Where is the recording? Still in the file case at Crandall Street. I photographed the financial documents, but I wasn't able to copy the audio file. It's on a physical drive, old format, and I didn't have the equipment to duplicate it. I left it in the case. The storage facility on Crandall Street was 8 minutes from the Arlen Hotel in the current traffic. Can Farrow get to it before we do? He asked. She'd need to know the facility and the access code. A pause that told him she was calculating. The facility is in Alara's name through the trust structure. If Farrow has been running surveillance on Alara for more than 3 days, she may have traced the trust. And the access code is in Alara's letter, which is in your jacket pocket. Another pause. Unless Alara told anyone else. He thought about Alara in the barn. The letter she'd left him. The combination he'd written down from the first safe he'd ever shown her in a Chicago property, when he said he wanted her to know everything about his life. He thought about Mara Sutton, who had been living with Alara for 3 months. Mara Sutton, he said. Who? The woman who was with Alara at the property. She'd know what was in the case. If Farrow reached her. You said they moved to a secondary location. They did. They were at the barn long enough. If Farrow had the barn covered for 3 days, he stopped because the math was already done. 3 days of coverage on the property meant 3 days of monitoring anyone who came or went. Mara Sutton had presumably moved between the barn and somewhere else during that time. Farrow was thorough, and Lena Farrow was thorough. That was increasingly clear. She had coverage on Mara, too. His phone buzzed. A text from the secondary phone, the one he'd left with Alara. He opened it. Someone followed Mara from a meeting 2 days ago. She didn't notice until tonight. She told me after you left. Damien, she has the access code. She knew it because I told her in case something happened to me. He read the text twice. The car was moving through morning traffic on the ring road. He looked out the window at the city going about its ordinary day and thought about Lena Farrow sitting in a hotel suite, knowing the federal meeting had happened, knowing the documentation existed, knowing that she had a narrowing window before the evidence was verified and on record with enough of a federal apparatus around it that even a legal threat couldn't slow it down. She needed that drive. She needed it because without the recorded call, the conspiracy charge was unprovable, and the worst Sawyer could build was a financial fraud case that left Corvain's operational connection to the Prescott structure as alleged rather than documented. Crandall Street first, he said to Callow. Callow changed lanes without a word. Irene. He had her still on the line. I need Sawyer to stall. Whatever she's threatening him with legally, I need him to take the meeting. Keep talking. Keep the channel open. Tell him the recording exists and that I'm getting it to him in under 30 minutes. He's going to need more than your word on that. Then tell him my wife spent 7 months alone in a house full of people who were working against her husband, collecting the evidence to save him, and I am not going to let Lena Farrow pull the one thread that makes it mean nothing. He paused. Tell him whatever you need to tell him. Just keep the line open. He hung up, looked at the city. 4 minutes to Crandall Street. His phone rang again. Different number. Unrecognized. He answered. Silence on the line. Then a woman's voice, collected and precise, with the specific quality of someone who had spent years in professional environments where composure was the first requirement. Mr. Vossler, Lena Farrow said. I think it's time we talk directly. He said nothing. Let her continue. I know where you're going, she said. I know what you're trying to get to Sawyer's office. And I want you to understand something before you waste. The next 20 minutes, the drive isn't there anymore. His hand tightened on the phone. We retrieved it 40 minutes ago, she said. Clean entry, no damage to the facility, no one hurt. Just the drive. A pause that was carefully measured, not quite satisfied, but close. So you have Gregor's cooperation, which helps you on fraud. You have Marcus's written account, which helps you on the internal conspiracy. The Corvon connection, the thing that makes this a federal matter rather than an internal criminal dispute that's gone. And without it, what you have is a story that's very difficult to tell to anyone who isn't already committed to believing you. She paused again, waiting. What do you want? He said. I want exactly what we planned, Pharaoh said. The transition goes forward on the adjusted timeline. The assets transfer cleanly. You step away from operational control with a financial settlement that is, by any objective measure, generous. And the people around you, your wife, your child, remain entirely untouched for the rest of their lives, because they're not relevant to the business outcome, and I have no interest in unnecessary complications. Car was at a light on Crandall Street. The storage facility was visible through the windshield, 2 blocks ahead. You're telling me this, he said, because you want me to turn around. I'm telling you this because going to that facility in the next few minutes accomplishes nothing and confirms to anyone watching that you don't yet know the drive is gone, which makes you look reactive and uninformed, neither of which is useful to you. Her voice was measured, reasonable, the voice of someone who was very good at making the terms they were offering sound like the sensible option. I'm offering you the chance to stop moving and think. He thought about Elara's letter. The combination is the same as the first safe I ever watched you open in the Chicago property. He thought about the recording. He thought about Irene, who had photographed documents at the storage facility, and who had been alone there for approximately 40 minutes last night before he'd arrived in the city. Did you physically retrieve the drive yourself? He said. A fractional pause. Did they open the case? Of course they opened which compartment? Silence. The file case has 3 compartments, he said. Elara mentions that in her letter. 3rd compartment for the financial documents. 1st compartment for correspondence. He paused. I'm asking which compartment your people found the drive in. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Long enough. The drive they took, he said, was the decoy. Irene pulled the original last night and replaced it with a blank drive in the same casing. He had not known this until 30 seconds ago when the logic of it assembled itself, out of what he knew about Irene, and what he knew about 40 minutes alone in a storage facility with evidence that needed protecting. The original is already with Sawyer. He heard Lena Farrow breathe. You have financial fraud, he said. You have conspiracy documentation. You have a recorded call that puts you in a criminal arrangement with a Corvain intermediary, and you in a federal building with all of it. He paused. Whatever legal threat you sent to Sawyer's office 20 minutes ago, you should think carefully about whether you want to escalate it. Because right now you're the subject of a federal investigation, and threatening a federal investigator is a charge that doesn't go away, regardless of who handles it. The line was quiet. Here's what happens next, he said. You're going to stay in that hotel suite, and you're going to have a conversation with your lawyers about cooperation. And those lawyers are going to tell you the same thing. Every lawyer tells every person in your position at this stage of a federal investigation, the first one to talk gets the best terms. He paused one last time. I'd move quickly, Lena, because Marcus already started talking 4 hours ago, and the terms get worse the longer you wait. He hung up. Callow had pulled over in front of the storage facility without being asked. Damien sat in the parked car for a moment, looking at the building. His hands were very steady, which was one of those things about himself. He had stopped being surprised by the stiller things got around him. The more, his body found a kind of 0-point equilibrium. It had served him well for a long time. It was serving him now in a way that felt slightly different than it used to, because it wasn't born from the same place. Texted Irene the call. Tell me it's with Sawyer. Her response was immediate. Has been since 6 this morning. I pulled it last night and sent a digital copy through encrypted transfer before I left the facility. The physical drive is still in the case where your wife left it. He exhaled, one slow, complete exhale. He texted the secondary phone, working. Stay where you are. Almost done. No response came immediately. Fine. She didn't need to respond. He called Sawyer directly. The man answered on the second ring. No introduction. No pleasantries. The voice of someone who had been waiting for this specific call. The legal threat from Pharaoh, Damien said. How serious? Standard intimidation, Sawyer said. My office has seen worse from better lawyers. We're not stopping. A pause. She made a move, though she sent someone to your building in the last 20 minutes. Not Pharaoh herself, a legal representative, who asked to meet with your head of communications. Rena Doyle, sitting in the storage room on the second floor with Petra outside the door. She doesn't have access to that person, Damien said. Good. Sawyer's voice was direct and dry and practical. Mr. Vossler, I want to be clear with you about something. The evidence your wife compiled is extraordinary. In 14 months of working the Corvan financial network, my team didn't get half of what she put together in 7 months from inside your household. When this is concluded, I'd like to meet her. Damien looked out the car window at the morning street. You'll have to get in line, he said. Sawyer told him what he needed from him in the next 2 hours, a formal statement, a verified account of the discovery of the file case, his cooperation on record. Terms for the investigation into his own organization, which were what they were, and which Damien listened to without interrupting. Because he had known since the barn that this was the shape of the thing, and knowing it didn't make it pleasant, but it made it clear, and clear was navigable. He was signing the cooperation agreement in Sawyer's field office at 1:15 in the afternoon when his phone buzzed. The secondary phone, Alara. He looked at the screen. One word, okay? He typed back, getting there. A pause. Then the baby moved. Today. First time I felt it clearly. He sat with that for a moment that had no tactical content. Then he typed, tell me more later. And he put the phone down and picked up the pen and signed his name to the document that began the end of the empire he had built, because the empire had never been the point, and he had just, finally, considerable cost, and in the company of very few people he'd managed not to fail, begun to understand what the point actually was. The cooperation agreement took 4 hours to execute properly. Not because Sawyer's team was slow, they weren't. They moved with the specific efficiency of people who had been waiting a long time for exactly this conversation and didn't want to give it room to collapse, but because doing it right required doing it completely, and completely meant going through the operational history of Damien's organization in a level of detail that was at points genuinely unpleasant to sit inside. There were decisions in that history that looked exactly like what they were when you described them plainly in a federal field office, under fluorescent lighting, with a recorder running and a lawyer beside you taking notes. There was no flattering angle on most of them. Damien didn't try to find one. His lawyer, a woman named Carla Briggs who had worked for him for 6 years and who had, to her considerable credit, not visibly flinched at anything he'd told her in the car on the way to Sawyer's office, kept the process moving with the particular skill of someone who understood that the goal was a workable agreement rather than a complete counting of every morally complex decision her client had ever made. She pushed back twice on Sawyer's team when they reached for more than the agreement required. Both times Damien told her to let it go. She looked at him both times like he'd said something in a language she didn't speak. Let it go, he said the second time. The legitimate operations are protected under the terms. Everything else, let them have it. Damien. The Eastern accounts alone. Let them have it. She let it go. By 5:30 in the afternoon, Lena Farrow's lawyers had made contact with Sawyer's office. Not threatening this time. The tone had changed completely in the 4 hours since the phone call in the car outside the storage facility. On Crandall Street, the legal threat had evaporated, and in its place was the careful, tentative language of people trying to establish what kind of conversation was still possible. Sawyer told Damien about it in the hallway outside the conference room, while Carla reviewed the final agreement language. She moved faster than I expected, Sawyer said. He was a compact man in his late 40s, with the look of someone who ran on coffee and institutional stubbornness. Her lawyers are asking about the terms framework. Marcus gave you his full account this morning. Yes. Gregor's financial documentation is complete. Also yes. Sawyer looked at him with the direct, calibrated gaze of someone who spent his professional life reading people in rooms under pressure. She doesn't have a viable position anymore. The recorded call closes the Corvan connection, and that's the piece she needed to contest. Without it, she's the architect of a criminal conspiracy with 2 cooperating witnesses and a documentary record your wife built that is, frankly, better than most things my office produces with a full team and a budget. He paused. She knows that. What does she want? Sentencing consideration. She's going to cooperate on Corvain's broader operations. She has information that goes significantly past what this case covers. My supervisors are going to take that seriously. He looked at Damien steadily. She won't walk away from this, but she won't serve the maximum either. Damien thought about Lena Farrow's voice on the phone that morning. Collected and precise, the voice of someone who had never had to fully reckon with the consequences of the architecture she built, because she was always positioned just far enough behind it. He thought about the word she'd used, asset. He thought about the 3 days she'd had eyes on a barn where Alara was sleeping. He thought about what he wanted to happen to Lena Farrow, and then he thought about what the agreement he'd just signed required of him, which was not the same thing. The gap between those two things was wide and uncomfortable, and he was going to have to live inside it. It's your decision, he said, and Corvain's operations expanding the investigation that's useful to you. Very, Sawyer said. Then make the deal that gets you the most useful outcome. He paused. I'm not going to stand in the way of that. Sawyer nodded once, the nod of someone filing information. There's one more thing. He hesitated not for long, but Damien noticed it because Sawyer didn't hesitate. The Corvain intelligence she has. Part of it relates to a contract that was arranged 18 months ago. Contract that had your wife's name on it as a potential target in the event that she became operationally problematic. The hallway was very quiet. Farrow didn't execute it, Sawyer said quickly. The record shows she actively prevented it from being carried out twice. She argued internally that touching Alara made the transition impossible to manage, that you'd burn everything if something happened to her. A pause. She's not a good person. But that's on the record. I thought you should know. Damien looked at the wall across the hallway, processed what that meant, that somewhere in the 18 months of the operation against him, someone inside Corvante had wanted Alara removed, and Farrow had blocked it, not for the right reasons, for the operationally convenient ones. But the outcome was the same. Thank you, he said. It was a strange thing to say about a strange piece of information. He said it anyway. He signed the final agreement at 6:45. He walked out of the federal building into the late afternoon light and stood on the steps for a moment. The city moved around him the way it always did, indifferent and continuous. His phone had 17 messages he hadn't read. He looked at none of them. He called the secondary number. Alara answered on the second ring. Done? It's done, he said. A silence. Not empty, full of something he could hear her deciding not to say yet. Are you all right? He thought about how to answer that honestly. I'm standing inside a federal building having signed an agreement that dismantles about 60% of what I've spent 15 years building. He paused. So no, not exactly. But I'm clear. I know what happened today and why and what it means. More than I've had in a long time. Another silence. Where are you going now? I need to go back to the office. Some things to close. Petra needs direction. And there are people in the organization who deserve to hear what's happening from me directly rather than through whatever they've been hearing through the day. He put his other hand in his jacket pocket, felt the letter there, still folded. And then I need to sleep. For approximately a year. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. You sound like you've aged. I have, significantly, in the last 36 hours. Damien. Her voice shifted. The slight formality she'd been using, the distance she was right to maintain, the distance that meant she wasn't going to pretend 3 months and everything before them had been resolved by one night, and one signed document eased fractionally. Fractionally. You did the right thing. I did the necessary thing, he said. Whether it's the right thing is something I won't know for a while. That's more honest than I expected. I'm working on honest. This time the sound she made was definitely something close to a laugh. Get some sleep, she said. We'll talk when you're not running on fumes and crisis response. When can I? He stopped, made himself not finish the sentence the way he'd started it, which was as a demand dressed as a question. Started again. Is there a time that works for you? To talk properly. I'll let you know, she said, not unkind, not a door closing. Just the truth of where things were, stated plainly by someone who had gotten very good at plain statement in the months she'd spent alone with her own thoughts. Accepted it. Okay, she said. He hung up and stood on the steps for one more moment. Then he went to find his car. The next 6 weeks were the most tedious and most necessary of Damien Vossler's professional life. Federal investigations have a bureaucratic weight to them that the more dramatic aspects of criminal dismantlement tend to obscure. There were depositions. There were document productions. There were 3 separate meetings with Sawyer's team at which Carla Briggs earned every cent of her fee, keeping the process inside the agreed terms, while Sawyer's colleagues tested the edges of what cooperation meant in practice. There were asset reviews and account freezes, and a period of approximately 10 days, during which Damien could not access large portions of his own finances while the federal inventory was conducted, which was profoundly unpleasant, and which he managed by occupying himself with the legitimate side of the organization's transition. The parts that were surviving, the real estate and logistics operations that had always operated separately from the criminal infrastructure, and which, once the criminal infrastructure was removed, turned out to be more substantial than he'd fully appreciated. Gregor Vane cooperated completely. He did it with the thoroughness of someone who had spent 9 years building financial structures and now applied the same methodical precision to documenting their own dismantlement. Damien didn't speak to him again after the conference room conversation. He didn't need to. Gregor gave Sawyer's team what they needed, and Sawyer's team gave Gregor what the agreement allowed, and that was the shape of it. Marcus was more complicated. Marcus's full written account ran to 67 pages. Damien read all of it. He read it in a single sitting at his kitchen table one evening during the second week, with a glass of water, because he'd made a decision to stop using Scotch as a processing tool, and he read all 67 pages without looking away from anything. There were things in it he hadn't known. There were things in it he had suspected and was now confirmed on. There were things in it that were worse than he'd imagined, and things that were more banal than betrayal felt like it should be small decisions. Incremental, each one rationalized at the time as manageable, as temporary, as something that would be corrected later. The familiar architecture of how people who are not cartoons end up doing genuinely terrible things. He didn't forgive Marcus. He wasn't built for that kind of rapid internal processing, and he knew it. He stopped wanting Marcus specifically destroyed, which felt like a different thing and probably was. Marcus entered a plea arrangement in the 4th week. The terms included 3 years of supervised conditions, a financial settlement, and the permanent loss of his ability to hold any fiduciary or advisory role in any organization. Damien heard about it from Carla and said nothing. Lena Farrow's cooperation with Sawyer's team on the broader Corvani investigation produced results that Sawyer described to Damien in their final check-in meeting as significant, and that the newspapers over the following months would describe with considerably more dramatic language. 3 Corvane principals were indicted. The organization's primary financial operation in the city collapsed within 8 weeks of the first arrest. Farrafo herself received a sentence that was reduced from what the original charges would have carried. Damien had told Sawyer to make the deal that got the most useful outcome. And Sawyer had, and Damien lived inside the gap between what he felt about that and what the agreement required, which was what he'd told himself he would do. Rena Doyle cooperated early and completely and was offered terms that reflected it. The communication records she provided to Sawyer's team on Farrow's placement of contacts inside other organizations turned out to be materially valuable to 3 investigations beyond this one. Damien didn't know most of the details. He knew enough. Sasha Farron, the woman from Gregor's accounting division who had called him from a hallway and told him about the timeline, and then texted him from the Barnes gravel road to warn him that Farrow was moving, was interviewed by Sawyer's team and was cleared of any involvement in the Prescott arrangement. She had known things she probably should have reported earlier, which Sawyer's team noted in their documentation, and which was balanced against the fact that she had reported them when it mattered, and in doing so, it had changed the outcome of the night at the barn. Damien assured through Carla that this balance was made explicit in the record. He sent Sasha Farron a note through Carla, 3 sentences, that what she'd done had required something that most people in her position wouldn't have accessed, that he wouldn't forget it, that if she ever needed a professional reference from someone who understood the particular courage of acting correctly in a circumstance designed to prevent it, he was available. He didn't know if she read it. He didn't follow up. Alara came back to the city at the beginning of the 7th week. He knew she was coming because she told him a text on the secondary phone the evening before that said she'd be in the city the following afternoon and that she'd like to talk if he was available. He responded that he was available. She said she'd come to the estate at 4. He spent the morning of that day doing nothing special, which was itself notable, because he had spent most of the previous 6 weeks at full operational intensity, and doing nothing special felt like a kind of discipline he hadn't exercised in a very long time. He ate breakfast. He read for an hour an actual book which he hadn't done in years. He walked in the garden. which he also hadn't done in years, and which turned out to be slightly overgrown in a way that was actually appealing rather than neglected-looking things, had been growing without being managed, which was apparently what gardens did when you left them alone for long enough. At 3:45, he was in the kitchen when he heard the car. He didn't go to the door. He waited. He heard Petra let her in. He'd told Petra she was coming, and Petra had said nothing, and had also clearly spent the morning making sure the house was in order, which Damien appreciated and didn't mention. Alara came into the kitchen. She was further along than the last time he'd seen her 8 months now, the pregnancy fully visible, her movements slightly adjusted around it, in the way of someone who had been living with a changed center of gravity, long enough to stop thinking consciously about the adjustment. She was wearing a dark coat she hadn't taken off yet, and her hair was down. She looked tired in the bone-deep way of someone who had been careful and vigilant for a long time, and was just beginning to consider what it might feel like to stop. She looked like herself. That was the thing. Through the pregnancy and the 3 months in hiding and the 7 months before that of building a case alone in a house that was working against her, she looked entirely and unmistakably like herself, which was something he found he needed to sit with for a moment before he could say anything. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. She looked around the kitchen. "You cleaned the garden." "I didn't, actually. I left it alone and it did that itself." She almost smiled. "That's the most you've ever said that wasn't about controlling something. I'm working on it." She took off her coat and put it over the back of a chair, sat down at the island, which was where they had always ended up having the conversations that mattered, in the kitchen, not in the formal rooms. He made tea without asking if she wanted it, because she always wanted tea in the afternoon, and that was one of the 10,000 small things he had cataloged over 10 years, and never once told her he'd noticed. He set the cup in front of her. She looked at it, looked at him. "You read all of it," she said. "Yes, the whole diary." Twice, he sat across from her. "The letter I've read more times than that." She curled both hands around the cup. The familiar gesture. He'd seen it 1,000 times. "What did you feel?" "The first time you read it. Like I'd been handed a full account of my own failures by someone who loved me enough to make them legible." He held her gaze. "And like I'd underestimated you in a way that was going to take me a long time to fully understand." She considered that. "You didn't underestimate me. You just didn't look." She said it without heat, without anything in it that was trying to wound him, just the statement, plain, the way she made plain statements. There's a difference. Underestimating implies you assessed and got it wrong. You didn't assess. I was there and you were somewhere else. In the empire, in the management of it, and looking at me was something when you had spare attention. She paused, which wasn't often. "No," he said, "it wasn't." "I don't want an apology," she said. "I've had 6 weeks to think about this, and I've decided I don't want one. An apology is a way of closing something, and I don't want this closed. I want it open and looked at and dealt with over time, not summarized." "Okay," he said. "I mean that literally. I'm going to need you to be a person who keeps showing up, not because of the baby. The baby is going to be fine regardless. I've made sure of that, and I'll continue to make sure of that. But because of what I said yes to when I married you, which was a real life with a real person, and that means the parts that are genuinely hard and don't resolve neatly." She looked at him across the island. "Can you do that?" "I don't know," he said, honestly. "I'm different than I was 6 weeks ago, and I'm going to be different again in 6 months. And I don't know the exact shape of who I'm turning into. What I know is that I'm trying in a direction I haven't tried in before." He paused. "That's what I have right now." She was quiet for a moment. "That's more than I expected you to say. I've been practicing honest." "I heard." She tilted her head slightly. "Sawyer called me 2 weeks ago. He wanted a statement for the record about the documentation I'd gathered. We spoke for about 90 minutes. A pause. He told me you said something to him. About 7 months alone in a house full of people working against you." Damien said nothing. "He said you used the word save," Alara said. "That I'd gathered the evidence to save you. That's what you did. That's one way to describe it." She looked down at her cup. "Back up. I didn't think of it as saving you. I thought of it as refusing to let the thing I loved about you get destroyed by people who wanted to use it. There's a version of you that's worth fighting for. I've always known that. The version that showed up at the barn without a weapon drawn and a plan to punish the threat, that version." She paused. "I fought for that one." "I know," he said. The same 2 words he'd said to Marcus in a different context, in a hallway that felt like it had happened in another lifetime. But these ones meant something different from any previous version. I know you did, the diary, she said. Do you have it? It's in the box. In your office. He paused. I put it back. I didn't. I left the room the way it was. She nodded. Something moved in her face quickly that she didn't try to hide. I want to keep it. It's yours. I want to keep it not as a record of the worst year of my life. I want to keep it as she stopped, pressed her lips together once. Kept writing, because I needed to say the things out loud that I couldn't say to anyone. It was the only place I had for the full truth of what I was feeling. She looked at him. I've never needed a place like that before. I used to be able to say things to you. The weight of that landed without drama. It was quieter than drama. It was the specific, undefended truth of something that had genuinely been lost, stated by someone who was neither using it as a weapon nor pretending it hadn't happened. I know, he said, the third time. This version meant, I lost that, and I know I lost it, and I'm going to spend however long it takes to make it so that you have somewhere to put the truth again. They sat in the kitchen while the afternoon light moved across the counter between them. He refilled her cup without asking. She didn't comment on the fact that he'd refilled it correctly, without asking, the way she always took it, because commenting on the small things was also something they'd lost, somewhere in the years of accumulated distance, and were going to have to relearn the habit of. The legitimate operations, she said eventually. What's left? More than I expected. He walked her through it, the real estate holdings, the logistics network, 2 import businesses that had always run clean and were now the foundation rather than the cover. It's enough. Not what it was, it's not an empire anymore. It's a business. A set of businesses. He paused. That's probably the right size for a person who's trying to be accountable to something other than the accumulation of control. She looked at him with the expression he'd never quite been able to name, the one from the early years. Not quite love and not quite worry, the one that was larger than both. He recognized it now, finally, for what it was. It was the look of someone who was paying very close attention, who had always been paying very close attention, and who was deciding, with full knowledge of what she was deciding, to keep doing it. The house, she said. What about it? Does it feel like somewhere you actually live? Or does it feel like an address? He thought about it. About the garden he'd left alone. About the lamp he'd found in her office that night. The one she used to keep burning in the hall. He'd found it in the storage room where someone had moved it and put it back in the hall without telling anyone he'd done it. It had been on every night since. It's getting there, he said. She nodded slowly. The room, my office, she paused. I want to change the furniture. Okay, the desk is wrong. 2, it's the kind of desk that belongs in a place where someone is doing something covert. I don't want to do anything covert anymore. I want a desk where I can spread things out and have it look like a mess. She said it almost lightly, like it was a small thing, and it was, and it wasn't. And I want to get a different chair for the window. Whatever chair you want, he said. I want one I can actually sleep in, she said. Because the baby's going to be up at night, and I'm going to want somewhere to sit that isn't the floor, and I want it in that room with the window, because the morning light in that room is... She stopped. Good, he said. The morning light is good. She looked at him. You were never in that room. I was once. Very early. Before you'd moved everything in. He paused. I stood in the doorway and watched you reading. You told me I was letting the cold air in. She stared at him. You remember that? I remember a lot of things I should have told you I remembered. He held her gaze. I'm going to work on that too. The afternoon was going gold outside. The particular quality of late daylight in early autumn, when it comes in low and turns everything it touches into something slightly more than it is. Alara looked at the window for a moment. Then she looked back at him. And this time, the look had something in it that was closer to present than any look he'd seen from her, since she came in less assessing, less protected, not open exactly, but tilted towards something. I'm not moving back today, she said. I want to be clear about that. No. There are things we have to actually do, not say we'll do. Conversations that have to happen over time. Patterns that have to be different consistently, not just in the immediate aftermath of a crisis when everything feels consequential. She held his gaze. I've watched you operate in crisis my entire marriage. You're extraordinary in crisis. The question I've never been able to answer is who you are when there isn't one. I'm working on finding out, he said. So am I, she said. That's what I mean by us doing the work. Both of us figuring out who the other person is when the walls aren't on fire. She put both hands on the counter, steadied herself slightly in the way she did now when she moved. I'm going to come back when it's time. And when I do, I want it to be because we've actually built something, Not because the crisis passed, and we defaulted back into the shape of what we were. Yes, he said. Is that enough for you right now? Yes? Everything, he said. She looked at him for a long moment across the kitchen island, in the gold afternoon light, with the full weight of everything they'd been through between them, and no version of either of them that was pretending it was simple or resolved or finished. Then she nodded once, the nod of someone sealing something that didn't need more words. She picked up her tea, finished it, set the cup down. Show me the garden, she said. He stood, came around the island. Didn't take her hand, not yet, that would come when it came, but walked beside her to the back door and opened it, and they stood together at the edge of the garden in the late light, looking at what had grown up in the months nobody was managing it. It was wild in places, and ordered in others, the places where the original structure still held, and the places where things had simply gone in the direction they wanted to go without anyone redirecting them. It looked like something that had survived being left alone, which was not the same as something that had thrived. But it was also not nothing. It needs work, he said. Most things do, she said. She was looking at a section near the far wall where something had come back that hadn't been there before, small, persistent, rooted. Some of them come back anyway, even when you don't tend them. He stood beside her and looked at the garden, and thought about the diary in the wooden box under the desk in the room down the hall, and thought about the letter he'd been carrying in his jacket pocket for 6 weeks, and thought about a parking garage on Elmore Street, where a woman sat for 40 minutes alone, thinking about how to keep the person she loved from being destroyed by the truth she was carrying. He reached into his pocket, took out the letter, held it for a moment. I want to give this back to you, he said. She looked at it, looked at him. You said to come find you when I'd done the right thing, he said. I'm not going to claim I've done everything right, but I did the thing that needed doing, and I came. He held the letter out. This is yours. She took it from him, held it the same way he had, without opening it, just the weight of it in her hand, the paper worn soft from being carried. She looked at it for a moment. Then she folded it again, carefully, and put it in the pocket of her sweater. The lamp in the hall, she said. I put it back. She was quiet for a moment. The garden was going dark at its edges, the afternoon finally letting go. You didn't have to tell me that, I know, he said. I wanted to. They stood in the cooling air at the edge of the garden until the light was almost gone, and then they went back inside, into the kitchen that was lit and warm, and Damien made dinner the only way he knew how to make it, badly, but with complete attention, and Alara sat at the island and told him he was doing it wrong, and he adjusted without arguing, and in the small ordinary friction of that, the being corrected and the adjusting, the specific negotiation of two people sharing a space with full knowledge of what it had cost them to be standing in it. Something that had been held very tightly for a very long time began, incrementally, to loosen. They didn't talk about the future that night. They didn't make plans or set timelines or inventory what had been lost and what remained. They ate the food he'd made badly, and she'd corrected into something edible, and they sat across from each other in the kitchen. And when she was tired, she said so, and he showed her to the room that had always been hers without being asked. And she went in and closed the door, and he stood in the hall for a moment outside it. The lamp was on. He went to bed. He slept without dreaming, which was the first time in 6 weeks that had been true. And in the morning when he came downstairs, she was already in the kitchen, standing at the window with her coffee, looking at the garden in the morning light with the expression of someone who was deciding something not out of fear, but out of the quiet, ongoing, unglamorous work of choosing. He didn't say anything. He made his coffee, stood beside her at the window. They looked at the garden together in the early light, the two of them, in the plain and imperfect silence of people who have been through the thing that was supposed to break them and have arrived, battered and clear-eyed, on the other side of it, not fixed, not finished, not innocent of the cost, but standing, still standing, together for now, which was the only form together ever actually took present and chosen and enough.